Thank you. Good evening, everyone, commissioners. Call this regular meeting, November meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Can I ask for a roll call, please?
Yes, good evening, Planning Commissioners. Oh, excuse me. Commissioner Moyer.
Here.
Commissioner Slant.
Here.
Commissioner Benefield.
Here.
Vice Chair Allen.
Here.
And Chair LaFevers.
Here. Thank you very much. With that, if you would all please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Any introductions, presentations, announcements?
I have none for you this evening, Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move on with our agenda. We'll move to the public comment period of our meeting. This is an opportunity for members of the community to speak on items that are not on our agenda tonight. So I believe I have 2 speaker slips for people who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda. I'll call those folks now, but if there's anybody else who wants to speak on an item not on the agenda, this will be your opportunity. The first speaker slip I have is Terry Schreiber. Come on up. Yep, stand up there. Make sure the green light is on the microphone. Do you see a green light down there? Okay. We'll see if we can hear you. You might have to speak.
Do I face you or do I...
Please direct your comments to the commission.
Okay.
Thank you. And
Hi, my name's Terry Wheeler Scrivener. I came to Carpinteria in 1948. Graduated Carpinteria High School in 64. Came back and took care of my parents in 2006, so I think I'm a Carpinterian. I live in the beach neighborhood. I'm concerned about the safety issue being potentially caused by flood, fire, famine, infestation, whatever. We have only one egress, that means in and out of the neighborhood. Other neighborhoods in Carpinteria also have only one way in and out, but we have the railroad tracks that prevent us from getting out in a speedy way. I'm kind of against the hotel proposition because it requires parking on the beach side of the railroad tracks. We have a senior citizen mobile home park at the end of Dorrance and 3rd, and often ambulances are on Dorrance. I just think the exiting of a 93 space parking lot, along with all of the people who live in the neighborhood, is going to be impossible with one way in and out. I know the state park has opened their exit and allowed people to exit that way, but I just hope you're thinking about paving another egress on Ash or Holly. And that's all. Thank you.
very good. Thank you for your comments. Okay, our next speaker with a slip is Ronald Orejo. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Thank you very much. That's perfect, Arwejo. So, good evening, Chair LaFevers, Vice Chair Allen, and fellow planning commissioners and staff. My name is Ronald Arwejo, Chair of the Planning Commission for the City of Oxnard. In accordance with the rules and procedures of our Planning Commission, I'm speaking not only for myself, but also on behalf of the Oxnard Planning Commission in my remarks to you today. I am requesting your support in our commission's effort to allow stipends for our members. I am currently spearheading an effort to allow our planning commissioners to receive stipends for their time serving on the commission, with support from the Oxnard Planning Commission that has been approved in a resolution directed to Oxnard City Council. I believe that you all serving on the Planning Commission for Carpinteria understand that planning commissioners serve an important part of the process in regards to the development of the city. I'm not sure if you're aware that of the 9 of 10 cities in Ventura County, plus the county's planning commission, Oxnard is the only entity, the largest city in Ventura County, with a planning commission separate from its governing board that does not provide compensation for its members. I'm using the time since our planning commission passed a resolution back in August and then agendized to a future agenda by the Oxnard City Council back in September to gather support from fellow planning commissions and their members in Ventura and surrounding counties of Kern, Santa Barbara, and Los Angeles that do receive a stipend allowance to give their own perspective to our governing board that stipends for the planning commission are reasonable, logical, and in the best interests of the city. Given that you are aware of the time and energy commitment to serving your city, I'm asking for your support of the Oxnard Planning Commission members when it comes before the full City Council sometime in the next few months. I will be contacting this commission via email in the near future with all the relevant information and potential avenues of support so that you have the fullest knowledge to assist us, if you wish to, in our efforts. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to keeping you apprised. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
How would we do that if we agreed to it?
It sounds like there's going to be follow-up email from Mr. Rejo,
Okay.
perhaps with a request of a way to support.
We don't make much.
Okay, is there anybody else who is here to speak on an item that's not on our agenda tonight?
Is he trying to ask support for Commissioner Pay in Oxnard?
Okay, I don't see anybody jumping up, so I'm going to move on with our agenda. We'll move now. Okay, I've been reminded that we may have members on Zoom who are wanting to participate, so I will ask if there are any Zoom participants who want to speak on an item not on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair LaFevers. If you do want to make a public comment, please just go ahead and raise your hand. Seeing none now, I will go ahead and end public comment.
Thanks for the reminder. Okay. We'll move on to our new public hearings tonight. Next on our agenda, we have two. The first one is the Monte Vista Off-Leash Dog Park. Before I ask for a staff report, I will ask if there's any ex parte communications that members would need to disclose. No?
No.
No.
Okay, doesn't look like it. So with that, let's move on to the item. If I could have a staff report, please.
Certainly. Good evening, Chair LaFevers, Planning Commissioners. My name is Megan Musoff, Assistant Planner, and tonight I am bringing you the 6-month check-in for the Monte Vista Off-Leash Dog Park Pilot Program. The applicant for this project is the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department of the City of Carpinteria. The Off-Leash Dog Park Pilot Program is currently located at Monte Vista Park, which is at the north end of Baylord Avenue. It is zoned for recreation, and its general plan land use designation is open space and recreation. And this yellow rectangle here is an approximate outline of where the Off-Leash Dog Park is currently located. A bit of background on this project. Almost exactly a year ago, in November of 2023, your commission approved a 1-year temporary use permit for the off-leash area in Monte Vista Park. and your commission approved this temporary use permit with two modifications. First, that it would need to return to your commission after 6 months of operation for a check-in to make sure that it's operating pursuant to its conditions of approval and that everything is going well. And secondly, to have the final design of the dog park be approved by either the city council or the city manager or the city manager's designee. So in February of 2024, Parks, Recreation, and Community Services went to the City Council with a presentation on 3 different standardized dog park designs that could be used for any dog park, whether that be a permanent dog park or a pilot program park, such as this one here at Monte Vista. The City Council approved all designs on a unanimous 5-0 vote, and they gave direction to Parks, Recreation, and Community Services that they would have the discretion on which of the designs to select for Monte Vista, whichever one they determined was most appropriate. The dog park, as built, is 173 by 67 feet, so that is 11,591 square feet, and this adds up to 480 linear feet of fencing. And what was approved by your commission last year in November was that it be no more than 14,400 square feet and 500 linear feet. So the as-built dimensions are within the approved project description of your commission. And as built, the dog park has 3 benches inside of it, has a dog waste station, which has doggy bags and a trash can. And also on different sides of the park, there are 4 different posted copies of the rules for the dog park. And you can see there, the little gray path is a little bit faint, but our Public Works Department has actually extended the path of the park to lead up to the gate to be more ADA accessible. And then the off-leash dog park has a double-gated entry, which we discussed at the hearing last year in November, so that a person can enter with their dog, close the gate, let their dog off-leash, and then open the second gate to let the dog enter off-leash, so to prevent dogs from escaping. And there's also, on the northeastern corner of the off-leash area, there is a larger entry gate that's very well camouflaged, but it's a larger gate to allow the lawnmower, essentially, and other large maintenance equipment to enter. CDOG, or the Carpinteria Dog Owners Group, which is a volunteer group here in Carpinteria, has been heavily involved with the operations of the dog park since its opening and prior to its opening. Volunteers from CDOG have been unlocking and locking the dog park every day. They've been unlocking it at 7:30 and locking it 30 minutes after sunset pursuant to the conditions of approval. They've also been maintaining and refilling jugs of drinking water for the dogs to be able to use inside of the off-leash area. And they've also been collecting usage data, and we received usage data from CDOG from July 12th through September 6th. And because this usage data was collected by volunteers, there isn't data from every single day at the exact same time, but they did have at least one data point for almost every day during that time span, and that data is attached to your staff report if you'd like to look through it. But in this presentation, I've picked out a couple of, I guess, interesting or illuminating tidbits from the usage data that they've collected. So 2 of the times during the day when they were most frequently able to collect usage data was the time periods from 9 to 10 in the morning and 3 to 4 in the afternoon. And as you can see here, the average number of dogs from 9 to 10 was 6.2, and it was 15.3 between 3 and 4 p.m. And of all of these data points, the maximum number of dogs observed was 10 dogs and 22 dogs, respectively. They also had dog park users fill out a survey to collect some more qualitative data as well as some quantitative data about the park. One of the survey questions asked users how many times per week they used the dog park, and the most frequent responses was, I use the dog park 3 times a week, which over a quarter of respondents said, and 19% of respondents said that they visited the dog park every single day of the week. Respondents were also asked if they drive or walk to the dog park. 79% indicated that they drove. They were asked whether a separate small dog area would be appropriate for the off-leash dog park, and 60% responded yes. And when asked to rate the dog park overall out of 5, 90% of respondents rated it 4 or 5. And this survey was administered in August and September of this year. So now we'll check in with how the dog park has been complying with its conditions of approval. Staff feel that the pilot program is operating in accordance with all of the conditions of approval. And anecdotally, from staff members visiting the park, either for a site visit or with dogs of their own, staff have noted that parking is typically available at Monte Vista Park in the Monte Vista Park spaces. Noise levels are normal, not particularly above the ambient noise levels of Monte Vista Park generally. And feedback that we've heard from dog park users while we've been at the park has generally been very positive. There have been some minor issues that have been reported. There have been 2 reported dog bites that have happened during the 6 months of operation so far. Both of these were logged with code compliance, and any needed follow-up was performed. And the most complaints that our city's code compliance has received regarding the dog park were mostly received soon after the dog park opened. And notably, these comments were mostly about off-leash dogs that were not in the off-leash area, and they were just running around in the other areas of Monte Vista Park. So this isn't particularly innate to the design of the dog park itself. It's more just about folks using the off-leash area for its intended purpose. And one thing that our code compliance did note is that some of the folks who were cited for having off-leash dogs in Monte Vista Park said that they had their dogs off-leash because the dog park had lots of dogs in it, so it was being heavily used, and so they felt that it was a bit busy, and so they were letting their dogs run off-leash outside of this off-leash area. There are a couple of other considerations for the 6-month check-in that staff wanted to bring up. The first is that CDOG, as I mentioned earlier, has been unlocking and locking the entry gate daily. And we suggest that that may not be needed. We suggest that you may recommend to relieve CDOG of this duty that they have volunteered to do. The Monte Vista Park generally is not locked and unlocked, even though it also follows the same schedule of opening at 7:30 in the morning and closing 30 minutes after sunset. And so this hasn't seemed to pose an issue. The dog park has no lighting, and so once it gets dark, people aren't really using the dog park. So one consideration for your planning commission. Secondly is that Parks, Recreation, and Community Services has expressed interest in making this location permanent. And per the conditions of approval and our city planning processes, in order to make this off-leash dog park permanent, a development plan application would have to be submitted and approved by your commission. In order to have the time to assemble a development plan application and do any potential fundraising or budget allocations for a permanent off-leash dog park, Parks, Rec, and Community Services intends to apply for a second TUP for an additional year to operate this pilot program. And so, to follow along with that, condition of approval number 17 states that in the event that Parks, Recreation, and Community Services wishes to extend this pilot program, they would need to apply for a new temporary use permit and return again to your Planning Commission for a second approval. Staff ask your commission to consider amending this condition to allow the community development director to approve this second temporary use permit if your commission feels that the dog park is operating without issue and that it does not seem necessary for a second nearly identical temporary use permit to return for a public hearing. And I'll just display a couple of site photos so you can see, if you haven't been able to visit the dog park yourself, this is what it looks like. And these photos and a couple more are also attached to the staff report. I visited the dog park. These pictures were taken on September 20th of this year. So here you can see the new path that leads up to the dog park, and you can see the double entry gate there. There's a dog in the picture on the right looking happy. This is what the inside of the dog park looks like. You can see there is one tree that's located inside of the dog park itself, and there's one of the benches. There's just a look along Pandana Street so you can see how far it's currently set back from the road. Here we are looking west, showing the off-leash area in comparison to the rest of the field at Monte Vista Park. And then this picture here on the right is looking towards the entry gate from the inside. And you can tell there has been a little bit of wear and tear on the grass on this area right inside the dog park. We assume this is because when people first come in, this is kind of where they stand and gather. So this area right in front of the entry gate tends to see the most foot traffic, both people and dogs. And lastly, here's just a photo looking at the dog park from the corner of Jacaranda Way. You can see, even with the 6-foot fencing, it has a fairly low profile. So that brings me to your commission's action options for this evening. Staff's recommendation is to receive and file this staff report and then provide any relevant direction to us as staff. Your second option is to provide any specific changes to the temporary use permit conditions of approval to address any concerns which your commission feels cannot be resolved through the current conditions of approval. Or third, your commission does have the ability to revoke the temporary use permit for this project due to unmitigable conflicts or nuisance impacts. And there's a sample motion there at the bottom. And I think that concludes my staff presentation. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks very much for the staff report. And I will open it up to commissioners. If they have questions for staff, now's the opportunity.
Just one question.
Go ahead, Jane.
If this should be returned to us for the development part, or does that go to staff and you just do it? Talking about the quality of the fence and everything, is it going to remain a chain link, or are we going to improve that somewhat? Is that what would happen in the development phase?
I'm happy to let Parks, Recreation, and Community Service speak to that if they have any additional information. We have Jeanette Gant here, Director of Parks, Rec, and Community Services.
Good evening. I prepared a few brief comments, and then I'll address your question if you don't mind. Good evening, Commissioners. Jeanette Gant, Parks, Recreation, Community Services Department Director. Thank you, Megan, for the excellent presentation, and I would like to extend my gratitude for CDOG for their ongoing partnership. And as Megan pointed out, locking and unlocking every day, bringing in water, collecting data, and distributing surveys. We really appreciate that partnership. I've been meeting monthly with CDOG to review the data that they've collected and discuss what is going on at the dog park. I've also enjoyed visiting the dog park myself a few times. And after reviewing the data and witnessing it myself, I would think it's fair to state that the first 6 months of this pilot project has been successful. In my 5 or so months with the city, I have not received any complaints regarding the dog park, which speaks to the positive impact it's making on the community. And as Megan noted, with your approval, we're excited to continue operating the dog park and based on continued success and hopefully positive data to ultimately pursue the establishment of a permanent dog park at this location. And to answer your question, yes, if we were to be granted the continuation of this pilot program, an additional second-year TUP, and then apply for a development permit, we would absolutely want to install more permanent and, if you will, better-looking fence. So it would be my intention to either find funds within the city budget or fundraising opportunities to pay for a more permanent, nicer-looking fence.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to help answer any other questions. We also have a member of our Public Works team who here with us this evening who designed the temporary dog park. Should you guys have any questions about the design specifically?
I have a
Great,
question.
thanks. Go ahead, Catherine.
It was mentioned in your presentation, Megan, and it was also in the material that you gave us, that owners of small dogs said that they wanted to have a park for small dogs or an area next. I don't know exactly whether it would be siphoning off of this one or an additional area. I mean, did that go anywhere? I wasn't in any of your presentation up there.
So the survey question just asked more of a theoretical question. Would having a designated area for small dogs only, does that seem like a good idea? Yes, no. However, in at least one of the approved designs that the City Council approved, it did show a small dog area within, essentially within the overall dog park. So if an off-leash area were to be built that had a designated small dog area, you can imagine a large rectangle with essentially a smaller rectangle inside of it, and that is where the small dogs would play and run.
Another question, in the pictures that you showed in the middle, you said there was a tree?
A tree.
And then there's something, is that a real fire hydrant? A fake fire hydrant? What is that?
That is a not real fire hydrant.
The dogs do use it.
I'm sure it gets a lot of use, whether it's workable or not. Okay, that's it for my questions.
Great, thanks. Other questions? Okay, I may have one when we come back, but I don't have any for now. So with that, we'll officially open the public hearing comment period. And I do have speaker slips. So I'm going to call these folks up in the order that I received the speaker slips. The first one is from Van Fleischer. And Van, you will be followed by Jim Rampton. So just so you get ready to come up.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to actually be here tonight to review this. And I think Megan has done an outstanding job in from the initial development as well.
Could we ask you to, and maybe it's just me, speak up or speak closer to the mic?
Sure.
Very helpful, thank you.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Anyway, thank you again, and also to Megan for the presentation. I just wanted to kind of put this into perspective about what this actually means. And not long after the opening of the dog park, I took my dog Yogi to the vet for a routine procedure visit. And the first thing she said to me was, "You have no idea of what you've done." I was a little taken aback. I didn't know what she meant by that. And said, so I asked, and she said, since the park has been opened, the human clients in her coming to the office have been telling her about it and how great it was to allow their dogs to run and play with other dogs. And I guess that didn't surprise me, that part. But what did surprise me is something else. The humans at the park began to actually meet neighbors that they had seen but never really met and communicated with. they talked with them. Imagine that. And while it's at the park, we have teachers in our group. They were meeting former students of theirs, and it was really warm to see that bond between the two. There were former workmates seeing each other for the first time in many years. People were talking. A community was being formed. People would have an issue with the dog. Other people with experience could help them with that experience. Many of them have joined, really gone all in for Sea Dog. They're volunteers opening up the park if they're living locally. They come to Avo Fest and man our booth for us, march in parades. They bring dirt to fill in the gopher holes. They just take care of the park. And it's not just one or two or three of us, it's a community. And I guess that's the thing that did surprise me. I didn't realize exactly how powerful this dog park could be in a broader sense. So I see now what my vet meant about, I had no idea because I really didn't. All I can say, you guys have a busy night ahead of you, so I'll just leave it at that. And on behalf of my colleagues at Sea Dog and the attendees at Monte Vista, I'd just like to thank all of you for giving us this opportunity. And thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks. Appreciate your comments. Next up, Jim Rampton. Welcome.
Good evening. I said my name is Jim Rampton. I'm a resident of Carpinteria. I actually live on Pandanus that faces the park. My address is 6099 Jacaranda. Thank you all for your time today. This is a little bit hard for me. I'm a dog lover, have had them the majority of my life. But however, some of the things that we've seen today, living where we live, directly in front of Monte Vista Park I've lived there for the last 6 years. My wife has lived there for the last 20 years in the same spot facing the park. We have seen unprecedented use at the park over that amount of time. Even in the last couple of years, we've just seen unprecedented use with soccer, with volleyball, jazzercise that occurs in the street, other activities, other exercises in the park, parties, both large and small, church services, live music that goes on. Like I said, the everyday exercisers that happens to use it, and the kids that use the playground. I mean, it's just been a wonderful service to the community to be able to have this park, and now we've had an addition to this dog park. The concerns and the comments that I share today shouldn't really come as a shock. Your last meeting you had in September, there was an overwhelming comments about creating a larger problem that already existed at the park with already fully utilized and out of control parking issues. Also discussed was why not El Carro Park, and the community development director explained that there was inherent conflicts with shared facilities, and this park has shared facilities. You have barbecue, you have playground, you have volleyball, you have soccer, all those shared facilities that happen to occur. And it would require a site supervisor, which the city did not have funding for. Our concern, in addition to the park, has forced, my concern is that we've forced a disproportionate impact to our neighborhood. Only those living in Villa Del Mar are impacted. Every day, we literally have front row seats to experience issues such as insufficient parking, which I have some resolutions if you're interested, increased noise with loud barking and fighting dogs, off-leash dogs, which was explained that they don't have enough room in the park already, so dogs are being out running the park. When people pull up to the park, they're letting their dogs out of the car off-leash to run to the park. We have, to me, increased public safety concerns that cars are parking in red zones, in no parking zones, parking in front of fire hydrants. Not that one that's in the middle of the grass, but the other ones that are there. Cars blocking fire lanes. You can see up, if Pandanus were to continue up to the end there, That's a very narrow, but people are parking up that way, all the way up from Jacaranda, all the way up. It's also limited the training ability for the fire department. Used to use that area often, multiple times a week, and now they no longer can. Some solutions that I think we have that if that we put the park in an area that can distribute the impact throughout the city. I think we have a very busy park. It's overwhelmed already, and we've already exceeded the amount of parking spaces that are there. If it stays, and the city, if they could increase the parking, currently, when you looked at the overhead picture, you saw that there's about 20 spots. If Baylor were to continue in front of the park, there's about 20 spots. And then about 9 street parking along the street side of the park. If they were to increase the amount of stall parking like you have on Baylard in front of the park, increase that from Baylard all the way up Pandanus, all the way to the end of the park, you would probably add another 40 spaces, but that's a big cost. We start now talking about a lot of costs associated with this project. You may want to hire, as it was stated, somebody to monitor all these things that are going on. My concerns with now that if the CDOG people are not going to be opening and closing the park, it's going to be used longer and longer hours. One of the other options is to maybe the Villa Del Mar homeowners group there, or the people that live right there, is some sort of parking permit and limit the parking on the condo side to residents only. Something along those lines that impact us. I wish I could really articulate well enough how big of the impact this has been for us. I beg you to explore different options and solutions to our concerns. We shouldn't have to impact disproportionately to have this dog park. You would never allow a building to be built without establishing the right amount of parking. And we keep changing the amount of parking and the use of this park, and it just keeps bringing more and more people. The numbers showed 79% of the people that are coming to this park are driving. They're driving and parking in front of our place. It has been overwhelming. So my concern is that we look at some resolution that it doesn't impact us, the residents of the neighborhood. So, any questions for me? Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments. Okay, next up, Jim Baylard. And Jim, you will be followed by Christy Boyd.
Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Jim Baylard. I live at 1150 Baylard Avenue. My house is on the east side of the park. Our house is about 100 yards, a little less than 100 yards from the dog park. I'm glad I'm not the only one raising issues. Certainly the dog park has been a popular addition to the park, no question about it. I think CDOG has done a good job of managing it or overseeing it, but there are issues, and I'll mention a couple. One is certainly dog barking, and that's not a continuous thing. It tends to be later in the day, maybe when the usage is higher, but it's certainly there, and we can hear it at our house. Also, parking at Monte Vista Park has always been a problem, and it's more so with the dog park, illegal parking. So I have to say, the city should really look to building more dog parks. It's really unfair to focus all of the dog park usage at one single park. Particularly when that park is already under heavy use. And it's really a broader problem than just the dog park. Quite frankly, Monte Vista Park is being loved to death. I've done sort of an informal survey of park usage throughout the city, and I would hazard to guess that Monte Vista Park is probably the most heavily used park in the city. We've heard about the many usages. It's particularly a problem on busy summer weekends in the afternoon in particular and into the evening. You, in addition to organized soccer games and volleyball games, you get large parties, sometimes in excess of 100 people per site. We've seen a couple of those take place at the same time. So I would say that I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. One is I'd like to see the city carry out a comprehensive assessment of park usage throughout the city, so that you have a better handle on which parks are being used more and less, with the idea of perhaps changing city policies or permitting so that you spread out that usage, so that it's not all focused at just one or two parks. And then finally, I'd like to suggest that the city look to find a site similar to find a site that can accommodate large parties for picnics. There's really a big need, and Monte Vista Park was never intended for that kind of use. It was purchased, my understanding is that it was purchased with funds from the two condo developments, and it was intended as a neighborhood park, and it's really, the usage has gone way beyond that. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Christy Boyd, followed by Lorraine McIntyre.
Thank you. My name's Christy Boyd. I live at 1200 Baylord, and I am to the north of the dog park. I don't have many issues with the dog park other than the continual illegal parking, which we've seen before the dog park, and we're certainly seeing it after. My issues with the dog park have to do with the aesthetics of it, and I'm understanding more and more. I appreciate your comment, Jane, that this is temporary, but if and when you decide to make a permanent park, whether it be in Monte Vista Park or somewhere else, I would really suggest that instead of city council having the design okay, that maybe it run through your architectural review board, because this is kind of like San Quentin for dogs, for those of us who live near it. It's not a pretty thing, and I am riding on the coattails of the previous speaker and Jim Baylord. Monte Vista Park was originally planned for the over 500 condominiums that are on Baylord. It was planned as a safety valve so that families could come over there on a Sunday afternoon and have a family barbecue. What's happening now is these massive parties are coming in with, I looked on the website and it says that the capacity is 25 per barbecue area. That is laughable. There are 50, 75, 100 people at each barbecue area. I know that there can be a special use permit, but no one ever brings an additional restroom, and there is one toilet for women and one toilet for men. And you can imagine with 300 people at 3 different barbecues that that is not adequate. The parking on weekends is a nightmare. No code enforcement ever enforces it. So I appreciate that you guys are letting us speak to this, because I think it's something that's been coming for a while. I think the dog park has exacerbated things. It's a shame, because I am a dog lover. I own a dog. But I'm just not sure that Monte Vista Park is the appropriate place for that. It's not a huge park, and it's taking a nice big chunk out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lorraine McIntyre.
Hello. Staff, council, thank you for hearing me today. My name is Lorraine McIntyre, and I'm with CDOG. I'm the treasurer of CDOG. I've been one of the founders with Van Fleischer. I'm also a neighbor. I live at Villa Del Mar, and I used to be on the homeowners association there for 8 years. And I will tell you, parking is a nightmare. Every condo has a garage and a carport for 2 cars. But every unit, we have 230 units there, multiple cars per unit, multiple families per unit. People use their garages as storage, so they can't park in the garage. And so therefore, street parking becomes very important for all the condos, and there just isn't enough street parking for a 2 or 3 car household when they're not using their garage. And so regardless of the dog park or the 78% of the 22 people that drive there that come and go in 30 minutes and leave and come, I don't really think that that's necessarily the biggest driver of the parking headache. I think it's more and more people cramming into these units with big trucks that, you know, take up 1.5 spots of a small car and people not using their garages appropriately for car parking. I also wanted to point out that for the small dog area, the respondents to the questionnaire were pie in the sky. Yes, they'd like to have a dog park, a bigger area that had a small dog. But we also have a rollout fence that we do roll out for small dog separation. And it's been very successful. So that makes the attendees happy. It's there for anybody to use. And it divides off a corner of the park, and people do use it. They're very happy with that. I also wanted to point out that the aesthetics, yes, we know that's a rented fence from Marburg, and that's all we could get, and they did the best they could. And if it does become permanent, aesthetically, there would be a lower fence design. It would be more naturally along the boundaries of the trees and the paths. It would look a lot nicer. I do want to point out that that path scrape that you pointed out when they extended that path, it was the tractor equipment that scraped it. It wasn't the dogs. The dogs have been amazingly so. The grass is beautiful after 6 months of dog use. I mean, that was one of the complaints that we heard at the beginning, is that the dogs were going to ruin the grass, but they haven't really. The gophers ruined the grass, and that tractor scrape, you know, the grass has never grown back in that area, and we fill it with dirt because it does get muddy, especially when it's wet. And muddy dogs are not fun to handle after they go to the dog park. CDOG ambassadors are on site almost all the time, regularly, and we do all kinds of barking mitigation. And we work with the people there. Most of the people that come regularly, they know not to encourage their dogs to bark because it is a nuisance. We try to be mindful of the neighbors. I live there, and they know me from being on the board. So it's, you know, it's very important to me that we all treat each other with respect, and that, you know, we try to listen to each other and try to solve the problems. I do want to bring up the comment that Jim Baylor talked about other locations, because City Council approved 5 locations, as you know. This was one of them. El Caro didn't work out because there was no fence. And so when you have a shared facility and you have soccer balls and dogs running in the same path, it becomes, you know, a hazard and a nuisance. With a fence, it mitigates that problem. But there are 5 locations that have been approved by City Council. And so it would be great to kind of get that ball rolling and to spread this around. You don't have to go before City Council again to get approval, because they've already approved it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this. It's made a lot of people happy, and we'll try our best to make neighbors happy. And again, parking isn't just the dog park people's problem. It's everyone's problem that's using the park and that are living at the condos. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all the speaker slips that I have on this item, but the public comment period is still open, so if anybody else in the audience would like to speak, now's your chance. Okay. I will ask if there's anybody on Zoom who is interested in addressing the commission.
Thank you, Chair LaFevers. Nobody on Zoom on this item.
Okay. And then we do have a number via email. Was it your intent to read those into the record?
Chair LaFevers, I had not planned to. I can if that's your preference, or we can just try to summarize them briefly.
Yeah, a brief summary might be helpful.
Sure, okay. So we had one comment that said that the off-leash dog park has successfully met the conditions of the temporary use permit and has proven to be a valuable asset to dog owners, and it should be allowed to continue operation and be made permanent at some point in the future. We had another public comment submitted that said, while they acknowledge that the dog park has added to the vibrant atmosphere of the park, there's become a parking issue. It's not just about finding a spot, it's also about the way people are using the available parking. There's been a number of people taking up 2 parking spots or parking in red zones or even blocking other cars in. And this creates stress for everyone, particularly since the park's already so heavily used. And then finally, there's a third comment that again highlights concerns over parking and the disruptions that this causes due to the increasing popularity of the dog park. And this commenter says they are hopeful that the Planning Commission and City Council will consider solutions to ease the impact on residents and suggest some adjustments to help with this, such as designating visitor parking for the dog park to limit the impact on residential parking, increased enforcement of parking regulations, adding signage, encouraging respectful parking and compliance with the rules.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I believe that is a fair review of the public comments received by email, and thank you all for attending and providing your comments. Much appreciated. And with that, I will close the public comment period, bring the item back to the commission for additional questions of staff or general discussion of the item before us, which really is to one, receive and file the report, two, consider if there's any adjustments to the conditions of approval that we would want to make tonight, or if there's any other actions we'd like to take. So, Jane?
Okay. One of the biggest problems we have in the city is code enforcement. You hear it all the time. We have 2 people that work diligently. It is not a reflection on their work, but we need more people. Where's Michael? Michael, we need more people. Please.
Commissioner Benefield, sorry, can you either speak closer to the microphone or?
Are you kidding me? I'm not loud enough?
Having trouble hearing you.
Loud.
Now you will be.
Oh, okay. Code enforcement was what I was talking about. That would help a lot with the parking. But let me tell you, when they build that red tail place, which we hope they don't, my Lord, I don't know how you're going to deal with all the people that are going to use that park unless they're building a park in their own vicinity, but I don't think so. Okay, a few more things. We should definitely keep searching for an additional dog park. There's too much pressure on this park. We all know that, but nobody seems to be moving forward with it, but I could be wrong about that. Also, my cat will kill your gophers. But you're gonna have to clear out the dogs. He can come in and get rid of those gophers. And the area that's people spoke of being overparked are people who live there and probably, I can't say this for sure, don't park in their garages because every time I go there, they're pretty vacant. So you might consider parking in your own garages. And I get that there's a noise impact. I can't tell you how many times I've moved because of barking dogs. And it's like, it doesn't bother them. Why should it bother me? Well, it does bother some people. So that's a real issue, but I don't know how to solve it, okay? I do think you should have the extension in order to create a much more attractive dog park. And I would vote to approve this dog park under those conditions. And you can have my cat for free. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Other comments, commissioners?
It seems to me that it's not all about the dog park. You got a lot of built-up situations that are making it bad.
Get close to that mic if you would.
Okay. The issue with if you have a garage and you can't park your car in there, and you come in here to complain about parking, I wouldn't do that. It's you just don't have a right. Those garages were built to put your car in. I bet 80% of the garages in Carp are full of stuff, and it's an issue. I went out to the dog park a couple of times when it first opened, and it was pretty mellow, but I wasn't on a weekend. So, and then I think, like, I'm into approving the continuation with the city council directing staff to go after a permanent situation at the end of the year of that year, and ask the city council to actively investigate the other 5 sites for a dog park and spread it out a little bit. When 78% of the people have to drive to the park, that's counterproductive. They should have parks closer to their neighborhood where they can walk, and that'll take a little pressure off that park, I think. And all this costs money. That's the only problem. I mean, I can talk and talk and talk. It's cheap, but to do this stuff like that ugly chain link fence costs $30,000. That's not chicken scratch. And then, like, if you're going to go for a wrought iron fence, you're probably looking at it closer to, $150,000. So you got concrete. It's an issue, but I think the park has been a success. I think it serves a part of the population that deserves to be served, and I think there's problems, and they need to be kicked down the road to the city council and to get the ball rolling to find some resolution. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, John. David?
Yes. Well, I'll start simply by saying that I'm in favor of allowing staff to go forward with the TUP extension. And partly that's in view of the fact that we'll be looking at it again for a development plan if it is to become permanent at this location. And in looking at it in the future, I found the data that CDOG collected, very useful, very informative, and helpful in making decisions about additional dog parks as well, I think. 22 dogs is a lot of dogs. And that was a maximum, but that's a lot of dogs in that space. And the average at 6.5 or whatever it was shows, significant usage and does illustrate, I think, the need. I see the need on the bluffs all the time. And I'd add that, one of the things that will be useful, although it may have the effect of even more, if successful, would have the effect of overloading the park even more, is communicating to whenever there is a code enforcement contact or by signage, by public messages, by announcements on the city website. This is available. Leases are required elsewhere in the city. But because we run into so many people, for example, on the bluffs who seem not to know that they could go across the way to the existing off-leash park, which is where off-leash dogs should be. But the need is clear. I would note that, I saw conceptual, rough conceptual plans for a dog park, which could be definitely larger at Lagunitas, which is a city property that we've had for many years, considerably larger. And kind of the converse of what Commissioner Moyer said is that, yes, 80% or 79% of people drive. One of the things that people in the past said was perhaps an objection to Lagunitas is that you'd have to drive to get there. Well, people are driving anyway. And also, as we hit the next item, we're going to be looking in the future towards more housing and more housing to the east and in that area. So there's going to be a population focus, I'm afraid, off to the east as well. And a dog park in that location at Lagunitas has the advantage of space, of parking, of being adjacent to, available by driving and future population. Attractiveness in terms of fencing, that's an area where chain link fence could be screened in time with natural native vegetation, some existing there now. And the plans I saw developed by our Parks Department were grandiose is too big a word, but for a very, very nice dog park, which would be wonderful, but cost. We don't have money in the city right now. We're in a budget crunch, as I think most people know. But in approaching it, at Lagunitas Park, basically what you need is turf and fencing. You don't have turf. We already had turf at Monte Vista. So those would be, to my mind, the primary expenses there. And I think that's it has a lot less of the conflict issues that some of the other sites have. So that is one thought. Now, one of the conditions of approval was continued CDOG involvement in the terms of opening and closing. I agree with staff that because they're daylight hours, we can certainly go to a trial of CDOG not being required to open and close the gates. But I would like to see CDOG responsibility continue to do at least, if it's for a year and a half now, 2 more summer surveys around the same time. I think that would be really useful in continuing to inform us this is a very popular thing that we need. And justify the existence and continuance. So I offer that as a consideration for the commission. I don't think it was a condition of approval before, correct, staff? Yeah, CDOG monitoring wasn't. You volunteered to do it, but I'd like to see you take it on in the future to help as it helped this time. And I think... just additional comments, side comments that we're not here to act on tonight, but I would agree, having seen the very large parties there, that maybe more attention should be given to the numbers of people that are allowed by permits there. I suspect that even at limits of 25, twice might show up, and then you have a code enforcement issue. And I'll just add that as a number of people know, I'm very much in support of finding the funding as soon as possible, and I hope others will support us finding additional funding for code enforcement. We were from 3 down to 2. It may be from other sources, but we found funding for other positions for good causes. But code enforcement helps in so many ways across the city. Their responsibilities are varied, everything from what we're talking about today to parking to dealing with the issues that come up in all the parks. And we have many, many, many parks users. I've said before, based on the calculation I did, we may have 1 million day uses a day on our city parks. 1 million uses annually, day uses in the city's parks and trails, and that's a lot of usage. So my continued rant, which Jeanette has heard before. My apologies.
Thanks, David. Catherine, did you want to comment?
Yes. Um, I have a couple of thoughts here. One is, CDOG mentioned that 5 spots in the town in Carp were approved as possible dog parks. Yes. Is that right? And I frankly don't, if I ever knew, I don't remember what the 5 were. But it seems like CDOG is a very well organized group that you yourselves might see which other spots might be a good place to put a dog park. And David has suggested a spot that he's familiar with, but the dog owners might have other considerations about what makes a good location. And some of these might actually be smaller, and that might be the designated small dog park. I do think, I heard loud and clear from the various comments that people made that the dog park, and I'm quoting one of you, the dog park is not the biggest driver of the parking. The parking issue seems like it's a big issue for the people who live there. This is not what you want to hear, but it appears that owners do have parking spaces, garages. They have maybe a carport space also. And that if the owners were actually putting their cars in their garage, then that would take a lot of pressure off. And I understand that you can have a household with two parents and 2 kids, and maybe that could be 4 cars. But if the 2 spots allowed to each unit were actually occupied by owner cars, that would be less pressure on the street. And I know this is not a popular sentiment, and it isn't just in Carpinteria. Across the whole country, people who have garages manage to load them up with everything. But our situation with not enough parking, it seems like that's an easy call. I think I would recommend that we go ahead with this dog park. It seems like CDOG has organized it well, managing it well, and that just the figures of what the average number of people that are using the park strikes me that it doesn't sound like a lot of parking would be caused by the dog park. So I think that it should go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you all for your comments. Clearly, there's a consensus on the commission that of accepting the report and moving forward. It sounds like with the support of the continued temporary use of the dog park, and I believe I heard support for revising the condition, which would then allow staff to authorize an extension, or community development director is probably a better way to put it, to authorize the extension without having to come back to the planning commission to do that. So I have a question around that item. I know in the staff report you referenced condition 17, and if you could just take a quick look at the conditions of approval, I think it's condition 20.
Chair LaFevers, that is quite correct. That should say condition of approval number 20 instead.
Okay. Just for clarity. Okay, and then, so just to, thank you for clarifying. So just a couple comments on my end. I guess, one is that I think we do owe appreciation to CDOG for their diligence in shepherding this through, and their involvement in making it successful and compliant, I guess is perhaps a good word, with the conditions. So I know one of their commissioners has suggested we would very much appreciate or like that to continue. So I don't know if the commissioners are interested in trying to make that a condition of approval or not, but perhaps there's more discussion needed around that. But either way, thank you for, you guys did a great job. Did you want to comment on that particular item before I go on?
Yes, actually I'd be interested in Representative CDOG addressing us on, what do you think about, do Do you feel your organization is stable enough, and will you be able to do the surveys again for us? Without us asking for it to be a condition of approval and mandating it.
I mean, CDOG has been around, we've been around for almost 10 years now. So we have no intention of leaving it. It's in everyone's best interest, including our own, to make sure that it works well. What we all want are happy dogs, and then the community as well. It just we're here to make this work. And I just have to say on the parking, almost never. I'm probably one of the longest stayers at the park, and maybe my longest is 1.5 hours. So as far as the parking is concerned, I also lug in.
I'm sorry if I could interrupt. You've answered the question, and I really hate to reopen the whole hearing, so we've already talked about parking.
Okay.
So thank you.
I do want to also say that we have a group of what we call ambassadors, and so during the 2 years that we were at El Caro, we were there every day, but we had limited hours, so we knew which hours we were there. So we have a group of our ambassadors here today, and they are at the dog park every day, and so we will continue that because we all have dogs, and so no worries. We're in it for the long run. Thank you.
If I may, Chair. I'd just like to emphasize that the actual data, I think, is very helpful if you could continue that.
We will.
Thank you.
And the logging in, yes. Thank you.
Thanks for coming back up. Appreciate it. Okay, appreciate the clarity on that, David. So informal commitment from CDOG to continue to support the park and collect data, I think is the intention. And if there's any other discussion on that, feel free to chime in. I think that's probably good on that. I guess my other comment really will be that, this dog park item at this location has provided an opportunity, I guess, to shine the light on the park itself, right? And its popularity and the significant usage and all of the impacts that come with that. So not necessarily part of our agenda item tonight, but certainly the comments that have been received around that are helpful. And, the suggestion to sort of evaluate park usage and perhaps figure out a way to spread that out more evenly, irrespective of dog park usage. We're talking about park usage in general. So there were some good suggestions we heard tonight, and I would ask staff if you could be sure to capture commissioners' comments with regards to those in the minutes so that it can be clearly and perhaps even, highlighted in your staff report to the city council when this comes up, just as a side item. I know it's not part of the dog park agenda, but look for an opportunity, I guess, to get some of those in front of council if that would be appropriate. Nick, did you want to comment?
Chair, just to acknowledge that we can definitely do that. And I think the fact that we have the Parks Director here as well is helpful in hearing some of this feedback and considering, how we change our operations going forward, not just with dog parks, but maybe also barbecue rentals and other types of activities that we allow to occur at the parks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I guess another comment with regards to, there was a comprehensive study done of opportunities for dog parks in the city that staff commissioned, and we had that information available to us when we approved this temporary use at Monte Vista. I think part of the idea behind this temporary use was just to see how it worked and what are the issues, and to be able to learn from and apply those across to other potential locations for dog parks, whether this one remains permanent or it's relocated to a different area. I think that was the intent of that, that assessment. And I think that, I know one of my concerns with this location is was that this park is already so heavily used, adding another use is a challenge at this location. And I think what we've seen is that the dog park and the way it's run is successful. And yes, there are additional impacts to the park as a result of the dog park, probably small compared to the use of the park in general. And so that's helpful for us. And I think as we look at other dog park locations, this is a good opportunity to learn. And Commissioner Allen's suggestion of a dog park at the Lagunitas site, which I think was on that list, has some merit. But there's, I also think, a more centrally located park where you're not having 80% of the users drive to bring their dogs would also make a lot of sense, right? So there's lots to be done. We've talked about the budget has been mentioned. The budget is the purview of the city council, and clearly none of this staff time is important as well to resolve. It's not just money; it's allocating resources to make things happen. So, lots to be done. And again, I think we have consensus on the commission. I want to make sure I didn't miss something. I'm willing to entertain a motion, and I know that suggesting we're modifying condition 20. And were there any other formal modifications? The rest was general comments to hours of operation.
Hours of locking and unlocking.
Okay, that's right. So, but that really wasn't a condition of approval anyway, that CDOG actually lock. I know that the hours aren't changing, but we never required CDOG to lock it in the permanent conditions, correct?
That is correct, Chair Lefevers. We are more so just looking for your general direction that CDOG would no longer need to lock and unlock it. That does not need to be an amendment to the conditions of approval.
And I think there's consensus on that. Is there on that item? Okay. So you have consensus on that item. So with that, I'd entertain a motion. Or additional discussion if others want to
I
comment.
move that we approve this, or we receive and file this report with the changes mentioned by the commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll just call for a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. And thank you all very much for your input. Really appreciate it. We are going to adjourn or recess for about 5 minutes to shift gears here. So we will reconvene at 6:55. Okay, we are back, reconvene this regular meeting of the Planning Commission, and we'll move on with our agenda. We are now on item 2 of the new public hearings, and item 2 is zoning amendments for the 23 through 2031 housing element. If I could ask for a staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair LaFevers. Just a brief little introduction here before we get started. Mindy Fogg is going to do the bulk of the presentation on behalf of staff. Megan is here as well, and myself to assist with any questions. And then Mac Carlson from our legal office is here as well to help answer any legal questions. And before Mindy gets started, I wanted to give Mac an opportunity just to provide sort of a high-level introduction of where this fits into the larger context of state housing law.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. The proposed housing element rezone agenda item before you tonight is a legal requirement of state housing element law. State housing element law mandates that the city regularly evaluate and update its housing element, which is a component of its general plan, to evaluate the city's needs, goals, policies, objectives, and programs associated with the preservation and development of housing within the city. As you may recall, the City Council, after consideration by our Planning Commission, adopted a housing element earlier this year. A key component of that housing element is a program to develop an inventory of land suitable for residential development to meet the city's regional housing needs by income level. When a city can't meet its regional housing needs by income level under its existing zoning capacity, it must rezone sufficient sites to provide adequate capacity to fully accommodate the city's regional housing needs as specified by the state. So state housing element law includes some specific requirements for certain sites to be considered adequate for meeting the city's lower income housing category associated with its regional housing needs allocation. So as part of this, as part of the the need to comply with state law, the city staff will present a rezone strategy that will require rezoning of a sufficient amount of land area and sites to create the opportunity for the development of lower income housing within the city. The housing element rezones are a key step in the city obtaining substantial compliance with housing element law that will allow the city to become eligible for state, federal, and regional funding programs, as well as avoid potential penalties and enforcement mechanisms. Staff will present their proposed housing element rezone strategy to meet the requirements of state law for this item. And as will be explained, your commission will have the discretion to accept, modify, or supplement staff's proposed rezone strategies, subject to the limits imposed by state housing element law. And I'll turn it over to Megan and Mindy to walk you through staff's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mac. Good evening, Chair LaFevers and Commissioners. As Nick said, I'm here to present on the zoning amendments necessary to implement the 2023 to 2031 housing element. First, I'll give a refresher on the current housing element, and then I'll describe the proposed project that is before you today. It has three components: the mixed-use zone, the objective design standards, and the selection of sites to be rezoned to mixed use. I'll then go over a couple of additional considerations with this program, explain the environmental review document, and conclude with action options for your commission. So as a reminder, the city's housing element is a required part of its general plan and must be updated every 8 years to identify and plan for the city's housing needs. Under state law, it must affirmatively further fair housing with considerations for mobility and access, and it requires the city to accommodate housing for a range of income levels. Due to the statewide housing crisis, the current 8-year cycle has stronger mandates than ever before. The state acknowledges that local governments do not build the housing. That is done by developers. But with the planning and implementation of the housing element, the city must encourage and promote a variety of housing types that are affordable for all income levels. So as you might recall, there was a drastic increase in allocated units for this whole region this cycle and for the city in particular. Carpinteria must accommodate 901 new housing units based on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. This table summarizes how that number is broken into income levels and then addressed in the housing element. So under our current zoning and code regulations, we can already accommodate most of the RHNA based on approved and pending projects, vacant sites, underutilized sites, and accessory dwelling units. That would accommodate, or I should say account for 68% of the overall RHNA requirement. But we're still short 292 lower income units, which equates to about 14.6 acres of medium to high density residential area. This shortfall is addressed in Program 1 of the housing element. But before I explain Program 1, let me explain the overall housing element process in a typical scenario. So first, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment is completed with participation by the state, the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, and the individual jurisdictions in Santa Barbara County. Then the city drafts an updated housing element that, among other things, explains how the city's RHNA will be accommodated. And after public input, it is submitted to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for their review and comments. After addressing HCD comments, the city adopts the element and submits it to HCD for its final certification. Once it's certified as being in compliance with state law, the city can apply for grant funding, but also avoid penalties imposed by state mandates. And then finally, the city would stay in compliance by implementing the programs in the housing element. Implementation of Program 1, which is to demonstrate adequate sites to accommodate the RENA, has to be implemented within a certain time frame. And in our case, that deadline passed earlier this year. So now let me briefly explain what happened with our process. In 2022, the city held public study sessions and got public input and submitted a first draft element to HCD. After addressing their comments, the Planning Commission and City Council approved the element. And as we submitted it to HCD for their second review, there were comments from Coastal Commission that caused confusion and delay. The Coastal Commission letter factored into HCD's second review and their comments last year. And staff then worked with both HCD and Coastal through the summer and fall months to make revisions that addressed any potential conflicting state requirements. Then the revised element was circulated for public review and resubmitted to HCD. We then received a preliminary letter of compliance from HCD, and we quickly readopted and resubmitted it to the state earlier this year. Now, although a compliant element was submitted, the HCD determined that the city must still implement Program 1 in order to be certified. Thus, they sent us that non-compliance letter and directed us to complete that Program 1. So staff then came up with the most efficient way to implement Program 1 by dividing it into 2 phases, and this brings us to tonight's hearing to recommend approval of Program 1 with a Phase 1. So now, what is Program 1? So as described in the housing element, Program 1 is a commitment to process amendments to the zoning code to accommodate the RENA shortfall. It requires rezoning a minimum of 14.6 acres plus a reasonable buffer area, which HCD has stated would be 15% of the shortfall. This would result in a total acreage of 16 acres to accommodate at least 336 lower income units. The rezoned area must have a minimum density of 20 dwelling units per acre, and the zoning must further allow for ministerial or by right permitting for developments in which 20% or more of the units are affordable to lower income households. And finally, the development standards for the rezoned area must be objective and flexible enough to ensure that the densities are achievable. And this would mean changes to usual standards such as minimum setbacks and height limits. So that brings me to now our proposed project tonight, which is implementation of Program 1, which we have packaged as 3 components: a new mixed-use zone, a new objective design standards, and a first phase of rezone sites. First, I'll summarize the new MU zone, which was included as Attachment A to the staff report. As drafted, the new zone would allow for mixed use or for entirely multifamily residential use. The exception to that would be any development on Linden or Carpinteria Avenue in the downtown T, which would have to be mixed use with a commercial use fronting the avenue. Oops, sorry, skipped ahead. It would also allow for accessory uses to the primary use. And as we noted earlier, per state law requirements, the MU zone would have a minimum density of 20 dwelling units per acre. We've also capped the density at 25 dwelling units per acre maximum and provided a pathway to ministerial permitting when at least 20% of the residential units are for lower income households. Finally, the MU zone requires that development projects also comply with the new objective design standards. This table further summarizes the standards proposed in the MU zone, such as setbacks would only be 5 feet, except for projects fronting on Via Real, which would need 15 feet. Building coverage on the lot can be up to 75%. Building height can be up to 35 feet. Parking requirements, it would be somewhat similar to existing multifamily developments, but with some more consideration for affordable units. And there would still be requirements for open space and limits on fence height and limits on mixed-use floor area. That last one would be in order to comply with the underlying land use designation in the general plan. So next, I'll summarize the proposed objective design standards ordinance that was included as attachment B to the staff report. These were drafted to initially only apply to developments in the new MU zone or other streamlined projects under state housing law. They're meant to be uniformly verifiable with the review of the development application using no personal or subjective judgment. This will be important for all MU zone projects, but absolutely critical for projects that pursue the ministerial permitting path. So this slide simply lists the topics in the objective design standards, including building form, site design, entrances, windows, materials and colors, and landscaping. The draft standards were reviewed by the Architectural Review Board on October 17th, and the board's changes were included in attachment B to the staff report. So next, I'll give an overview of the sites to be rezoned, which were compiled in attachment C and E of the staff report. This table shows the 19 candidate opportunity sites that were included in the adopted housing element as suitable sites to be rezoned to accommodate the RHNA shortfall. As you can see in the last column, 3 of the sites would require an amendment to the general plan in order to be rezoned to residential use. Therefore, staff is recommending that those 3 sites not be considered at this time, but the remaining 16 sites could feasibly be considered for rezoning right now without triggering a GPA process. While all 16 sites could be rezoned now, not all are necessary to achieve the HCD certification. Staff recommends that the rezones be processed in 2 separate phases, such that the first phase include enough acreage to meet HCD requirements, but are also easier sites to rezone. These would include sites that are previously developed, have minimal environmental constraints, and are located close to transit and services. So with that in mind, we have divided the candidate opportunity sites into recommended phase 1 and phase 2, as shown here on figure 1 of attachment E of the staff report. So phase 1 is shown in orange and primarily located in the downtown T area, and phase 2 is shown in purple. Whichever sites are ultimately included in phase 2, whether it be these purple sites or other ones that you recommend, those would be considered and processed as part of the city's general plan update process, which is already underway. So this slide summarizes the 9 candidate sites that staff recommends as phase 1. And these would comfortably cover the RHNA shortfall and buffer. As a reminder, we need at least 16.8 acres that would accommodate up to 336 lower income units to achieve certification. And we also have backup slides with the site profiles for each of these and for the other remaining candidate sites to discuss any specific sites that you would like to know more about. And then while we were preparing the zoning amendments for your review, we internally discussed a couple of additional items that we thought should be brought forward for your consideration. First, regarding the name of the new mixed-use zone, it was brought to our attention that the name could be misleading since it also allows for residential-only projects. And so please let us know if you have a preference on the name of the zone, because that could be changed at this point before we take it to City Council. And then secondly, an additional site that was not in the final list of 19 candidate opportunity sites could be recommended by your commission for the Phase 1 rezones. The Lagunitas site at 6380 Villa Real was listed as candidate site number 5 in the housing element last year, but it got moved to the pending project list and counted as 159 moderate and above moderate units when an application came in for mixed-use development on the site. That application has since stalled, and the site could be included in your recommendation. This slide shows an aerial view of the 8.63 acre site, and although it could qualify as potentially 172 lower income units, staff doesn't recommend that you entirely rely on it for Phase 1, since an updated application could still cause this to be a pending project. But it's definitely something that you can consider and you could recommend. And that brings me to attachment D of the staff report, which includes a draft addendum to the city's 2003 General Plan Program EIR. As described therein, the proposed Phase 1 rezones would be consistent with the general plan and could be covered under the corresponding program EIR under CEQA. The additional analysis in the addendum covers the proposed project, including all 16 candidate sites that don't require GPAs. And if your commission recommends adding the Lagunitas site, staff could include that also in the addendum before consideration by City Council. And then before I conclude with action options, we do have some record corrections that were discovered today. When your commission is ready to make a motion, we will ask that these changes be included. So as you can see, we have a few clarifications in the MU zone, attachment A, as shown here in red underline. We wanted to make clear that the 20% lower income would be deed restricted units, and we wanted to be very clear about which sections we're citing regarding the affordability. And then also in attachment B, the objective design standards, we had a minor clarification as shown in red underline here. It's not a total floor area or a total 70%, it's up to. So with that, I'll now provide a summary of your action options. You may recommend to City Council that the proposed ordinances be adopted and the addendum considered without change. Or you could decline to provide a specific recommendation to Council. Or you could recommend further revisions to the proposed project and request that it be brought back to Planning Commission for consideration. A sample motion is shown here, but we also have a Word document that we can bring up on the screen to make specific changes to any motion being considered, and including those record corrections. And we also have an Excel spreadsheet that we can pull up on the screen and share and use to calculate the units and acreages in the event that any other candidate sites are contemplated, or if you wanted to switch out any candidate sites, we can share that tool so that you can see what the totals are. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have individual site profiles to pull up on the screen if you need more information about any particular site. So with that, I'll stop here, and our team is available for any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the staff report, and I'll open it up for commissioners to ask any questions of staff at this time. Jane, I see you're up.
First of all, I'd like to say that was an excellent report because it made it all very clear. It was kind of clear to me, but there was a lot of muddy parts. And one of those muddy parts is when you say low income, is that 80% of your income? Or, I mean, because I see low, very low, lowest, lower. Where does low go? I mean, how close is it to moderate?
Yeah, when we were referring to our arena shortfall, we were referring to the categories below moderate, so very low and low combined. And as far as the mean income,
The income level for this category would be 80% of the area median income or below.
Yeah. Do you know what that is? I just thought, it's just a nothing number without a figure.
Through the chair, Commissioner Benefield. So these income thresholds are set annually by HCD in coordination with the federal government, and they're adjusted based on household size. So I can pull up the current income levels if that would be helpful.
Give me an example of four-person family or something.
Sure. So Santa Barbara, for a 4-person household as of 2024, is $130,350.
That's what they have to make? I don't even make that.
That's the maximum amount that they would have to make, that they would be eligible for the lower income
I see.
category.
Okay, that makes more sense, yeah.
And what are the other categories for low, very low?
So through the chair, lower encompasses 0 to 80%. The income levels are then categorized below that into acutely low, extremely low, very low, and low.
I want a dollar amount. That makes it much
Oh.
more real.
Sure. So for a family of 4, acutely low would be $17,850. For a family of 4, maximum income. Extremely low would be $48,800. For a family of 4, very low would be $81,300. The median income would be $119,100, and those numbers are a little different because of adjustments applied by the feds and the state.
Wow. Thank you.
I have a
Catherine,
question.
sure, go ahead.
So at the very beginning of this, you talked about missing a deadline, and that seems to be account in part for why we are where we are. So did they give you a new deadline?
through the chair, they did not give us a new specific deadline, but the legislature did pass more laws this year, which incur more penalties for jurisdiction not being in compliance. So basically, the longer we're not in compliance, the more that there's, risk, and so the sooner we can get certified, the better it'll be for the city.
So could you give us some kind of timeline, like with this? So there's this part of it, and then it has to be approved by the city council, is that right?
Correct, yes, through the chair.
And then it goes to the HCD?
Yes, we would submit it to the HCD as soon as the second reading is done by the city council. So there's a first reading and a second reading. And then we would submit it to HCD and Coastal Commission at the same time. But we are hopeful that HCD will certify it even while Coastal Commission review is still pending.
So where I'm going with this is I'm trying to get a sense, sort of a time frame, and like, I gather time is pretty important here. So, are there points in here that could be debated, or you need to know tomorrow? I mean, not literally tomorrow, but do you get the drift of my question? What time frame are we looking at? Can it be
Through the
done by
chair.
the end of the calendar year 2024? And is that sufficient, or are they going to come back and say, oh, no, you didn't do something right?
Through the chair, some of this is dependent upon, what happens with your commission tonight, but our intention is to move this first phase of the rezones through our local process, through planning commission and through city council approval as soon as we can. Ideally, that could be by the end of this calendar year, depending on, what sort of feedback we receive from your commission tonight, or what sort of feedback we receive from the city council at the first reading hearing. That might get pushed a little bit into the new year. But the intention is to complete our local process as soon as we can. Once we submit it to HCD, they have up to 60 days to complete their certification review. So, at best, right, assuming we were to complete this local process here by, let's say, the end of this year, just for argument's sake, then the soonest we could expect to hear from HCD would be probably sometime in February or early March of next year.
And a question I have about all these things is if we change the zoning so it could be residential, with all of the new changes with the builder's remedy laws, if we change it, can a developer come in and say, well, I'll provide randomly picking site 18, I'll supply the 22 lower income units, and then in addition, because I get all these bonuses, I'm going to have 50 more? I mean, how do these things blend together, or are these immune from the builder remedy solution if we get the zoning changed?
Commissioner Slant, through the chair, do you mean density bonus, or do you mean builder's remedy? Because builder's remedy would not take advantage of these rezones. That would be kind of a separate process under state law. But it sounded like you were asking about if they could take advantage of further density.
So these sites that you have indicated, and you've shown the number of units that could be built on them, with the rezoning of these, so residences could be built on them, could a developer come in and agree to build the number of low-income units that you've got on this list? And by the way, I'm going to build all these other ones because... So are these, I guess what I'm trying to say is, are these things going to be only low income built on them, or low income as a component of some much bigger project? Because the sense I've gotten with all these changes is that projects could be really way bigger than we've ever had in our city.
Commissioner Slant, I think you're touching on a couple different points here, and I'll try to address all of them.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, in answer to your first question, which seems to be asking, can a developer stack various housing laws on top of these rezones?
Yes, that's my question.
And
Thank you for summarizing it.
The answer to that question is yes. A developer could stack some of the allowances provided for under state housing law, like density bonus, on top of our rezones and use that as a way to pursue additional units, even beyond what this zoning would otherwise allow for. And or to seek relief from, some of the development standards like parking limitations or height limits or what have you to accommodate their project. So that there is that distinct possibility. Separately, sorry, it's escaping me what else you were kind of touching on here. I need a moment to regroup here.
Reduced parking, reduced all that stuff.
Right. I think your other question was about, would a project need to come in that provides, all lower income units, or could they provide a mix? And they could provide a mix, right? So this zone district requires a certain minimum density. And for planning purposes, that allows us to count it towards meeting our low income need, but it doesn't obligate a developer to actually come in with a 100% low-income project. And so that's why, we're anticipating, right, that even though for planning purposes to meet our minimum obligations, we're counting this as all are mostly going towards our lower income need, but anticipating that some of these projects or some of these sites may get redeveloped at something less than 100% lower income. That's why we have this second phase of rezones that'll be looked at as part of the general plan amendment that'll pick up and create additional capacity for us down the road, expecting that we may well need it, maybe not right away, but maybe at year 6 or 7, somewhere down the line.
I guess another way of getting at what I'm asking is, where you suggest the number of units that could be built on each site, is that the limit of the number of units? So a developer is going to do 40 units, but maybe only 10 are low income.
So for the purposes of number of units, we've estimated the minimum that would be required on each of these sites at 20 units per acre. Right, so per the proposed zoning, someone could come in under the city's rules at up to 25 units per acre, which would give us even, a net increase beyond what we've estimated. But we've provided, the minimums at that 20 units per acre estimate. So that's the floor that they would need to provide in terms of number of units. And then from there, the developer would have some flexibility to decide what percentage of those units are allocated to the different income categories, right? So if they allocate at least 20% of those units to the lower income categories, then they would potentially get the benefit of that streamlined ministerial permitting process in exchange for having provided those lower income units.
So there is kind of an upper limit on the number of units that could be built.
Under the city's zoning regulations, yes, it'd be up to 25 units per acre, right? So let's just, to keep the math easy, if you had a 1 acre site, the city zoning would say you need to build at least 20 units on this 1 acre property and up to no more than 25 units for this site. Now, going back to our first question, right, of the stackable, kind of nature of some of these state housing laws, a developer could come in and say, well, I want to seek density bonus allowances on this property, and I'll set aside additional units as lower income in exchange for getting to build another 25% more units or 30% more units or whatever. It's on a sliding scale, so it's hard to say. But somebody could do that, and they would be allowed to do that under state law, so long as it can be found consistent with our coastal plan.
Would that go through the objective criteria? Or?
The objective design standards would apply. One of the benefits, if you will, for a developer under density bonus is that they can request a certain number of waivers or concessions from development standards. So conceivably, a developer could request a concession or a waiver from one or more objective design standards or from one or more of the development standards of the MU zone if needed to try to accommodate their project.
But if we turn it in and HCD says yes and the Coastal Commission says yes, does that get us out from at least a developer?
It closes the loop on potential for a builder's remedy application.
Okay.
But it would not close the loop on, the allowance for density bonus type projects or some of the other types of housing, production incentives that are out there under state law.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Go ahead, Jane.
About the height, I see there's the bottom floor is 10 feet, the second one is 8 feet. Are you allowing 3 stories now? Because you said 35 feet is the maximum, which we've always had at 30, but.
Commissioner Benefield, correct. So as part of this mixed-use zone, we are proposing to increase the height limit in this one particular zone district from 30 feet, which is the maximum elsewhere in the city, to 35 feet for this new zone district. And that comes at the direction of HCD. So what HCD has told us is that the 30-foot height limit is an impediment to actually being able to build projects at 20 units per acre. And so they didn't tell us what we need to increase it to, just that we need to increase it to a height that's high enough to accommodate a 3-story, a typical 3-story project. Okay. And so we did do a little bit of research on this, looking at, kind of what typical ceiling heights are on our multi-level residential projects, what typical roof heights are, and that's how we arrived at that 35-foot proposed limit as a starting point for a negotiation, right? There's maybe a little bit of wiggle room in there where it could come down slightly or where it could go up from there, depending on the opinions of the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council, but we felt like 35 feet was a reasonable starting point to accommodate, something like a 10-foot ceiling on the ground floor, 9-foot ceilings, or up to 9-foot ceilings on the upper floors and a typical shallow pitched roof. That's sort of how we landed there. You might be able to squeeze a little bit out of that, but if we push it down too low, we run the risk of HCD coming back and saying, no, this still isn't going to accommodate typical 3-story development.
These standards, are they amendable rather easily in case you forgot something or something gets out of hand? Or is it a whole ordinance change?
These would be ordinances, so they would require, if we wanted to make changes to them down the road, they would require an ordinance amendment. Depending on which standard we're tinkering with, some might be a tougher push than others in terms of getting either council support and or ultimately coastal commission support. So for example, if we, and this kind of is getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the objective design standards, right, is something where we made an attempt here to provide sort of a base level of coverage to addressing some of the design considerations that we see come up on these multifamily projects that we wanted to have some level of protection for in the event of these ministerial projects that would otherwise circumvent Architecture Review Board or the Planning Commission. And so we see the current proposed objective design standards as sort of a minimum, and over time we might want to tinker with them and add on to them or refine them based off of how the first couple projects go that invoke them. Something like an objective design standard that's really only talking about what a building looks like, Coastal Commission probably wouldn't have much to say about that. So that might qualify for, kind of a streamlined approval by them in the event we want to make amendments down the road. Whereas something more significant, like further changes to, let's say, just for argument's sake, increasing building height beyond 35 feet, that might be a tougher pill for Coastal Commission to get behind, and we might, that one might take longer to negotiate or work through if we were to pursue something like that.
I have another question about the mixed use designation. Would that allow for more live-work units? For example, on Palm Avenue, there's a big apartment project that are all designed to have people live and work in the same unit. Would this be a way of accommodating those or more easily accommodating them?
Through the chair, Commissioner Slant, it could. So we've done a couple of live-work projects in the past with the Palm Avenue lofts being, the largest example. We have a few others sprinkled throughout the city. I think the popularity for them seems to have sort of waned over the years, but certainly if somebody was interested in pursuing a live-work project, I think they could do so under this proposed zoning.
The manager of the one on Palm Ave said there's a long waiting list.
I'm sure
That's any
they're in a great
indication.
location.
David?
Yes, thank you. We've talked about building height and that basically staff has determined that this is the point, 35 feet is the point at which we won't meet HCD resistance. But how about the minimum 2 foot second, third story setback? To me, 2 feet seems on a large building barely perceptible. Do we think we could push that envelope a little bit?
I think it would be perceptible.
Make it 4 feet, for example, or 5 feet.
Through the chair, Vice Chair Allen, give us just a moment here because I think there are a couple standards that speak to upper floor setbacks, and I just want to make sure we're capturing the correct ones here and replying to you.
I think H is what I'm looking at.
Commissioner
Page
Allen,
2 of them.
yes, I believe you're
Standards.
referring to 14.51040H, the contextual upper story
Yes.
step back. This 2 feet, during the Architectural Review Board meeting, a similar concern was raised by one of the board members who was concerned similarly to you that this may not be a perceptible enough change in facade setback, if you will. However, another board member noted that if we were to require this step back to be any larger, we would potentially run the risk of reducing the potential density for the building. Potentially if you required the upper stories to have a more dramatic step back, you are reducing the potential floor area for the upper stories, and potentially you would be unable to accommodate the required density. So that was some of the discussion that happened at the ARB hearing.
And just
And I'd We say, well, of course that's true. You know, you're making less buildable area, but the question would be, okay, has it actually been balanced to know that we're at the, you know, that if we went further, it would be indefensible, and how far we could go. I mean, how do we arrive at that and be sure that we don't protect the community as much as possible with an aesthetically desirable setback?
Vice Chair Allen, I have a couple thoughts on this, and then I'll see if Megan wants to add on to what I was going to say. So, you know, first off, I think we need to consider that this upper story setback requirement is in the context of other standards that are also getting at some of these same issues, right? So the objective design standard just above it, subsection G, is upper floor massing, which also then, you know, further limits, right, what the amount of square footage that can be on upper floors as a percentage of the ground floor. And so effectively, you know, G may end up being, you know, more impactful in terms of second floor massing than that minimum 2-foot setback requires, but you ultimately have to comply with both. So, there, you know, I think you need to look at these standards in the context of their entirety rather than just looking at them only separately, because sometimes they're working in unison with one another towards achieving what we're trying to do. The other point I wanted to make is that kind of like with the height discussion of where, you know, HCD can push back and say they see this as an impediment to meeting the density that you're setting out to achieve. We've seen and heard of similar situations where HCD has pushed back on local jurisdictions that come up with development standards or objective design standards that they feel go too far and start to chip away at that, you know, that actual buildable capacity to meet the densities that you've called for. And so there is a delicate balance there. What we've done with ours is we've looked to some of our other neighboring jurisdictions, County of Santa Barbara and City of Goleta, to see you know, what passed muster there, and we've tried to mirror those types of standards and those levels of, you know, kind of step backs and reductions in massing, so that we're not, you know, way out there on a limb beyond what our neighboring jurisdictions have done.
Yeah, thank you. That's the kind of, you know, thing I needed to hear, that we aren't doing it completely in a vacuum in terms of, to put it bluntly, what we can get away with the state. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Allen, it would seem to me that your concern could be accommodated in the design of the facade of this project. I mean, the way that lots of ways that you could design a project to mask the mass of the structure. And so from the street, you would see that it was going back, even though it's maybe only 2 feet. It would not appear to be a massive structure.
And I think that is called for in some of the other standards.
Correct.
Doing the best you can.
You know, just kind of briefly elaborating on some of these standards as they relate to massing and facades, right? In addition to having upper floors be stepped back and stepped in, there's also requirements for, you know, kind of horizontal steps in the facades to break up elevations and have articulation, to have, you know, entrances that face out towards the street be more animated with porch features and bay windows and things like that. To require roof forms to be broken up and varied every, I think now 30 feet, based on the input from the Architecture Review Board. All of these things help to, you know, break up massing and scale and provide more articulated and hopefully more interesting buildings that, you know, would better fit into, you know, our community's fabric as opposed to some kind of monolithic, you know, box, if you will.
Okay. John, David, did you have additional questions?
Yes, on a different subject, just in the objective design standards. And I don't know if a thought has been given to it, but we raised a number of times with larger projects, particularly for income, for lower income, the provision of internet access by Wi-Fi or otherwise. Is that a feasible requirement to add? Wi-Fi access shall be provided to all units. And obviously, that's where some provision or assistance is most needed. So
through the chair, Vice Chair Allen, My preference would be to deal with something like wireless internet access through standard conditions for these new types of development projects. So not through a design development standard, since the provision of wireless internet service is not really a land use control rather than a service to the residents. But that's certainly something we've included in projects in the past and will be mindful of in the future.
Commissioner Moyer, questions?
So, in terms of timing, what's it going to cost us? Like if we push, we add some iffy.
John, could you speak into your mic, please?
If we add some questionable increases, what's it going to cost us if it kicks back?
Commissioner Moyer, I think the primary risk, as I see it, is just a longer period of time during which we remain out of compliance, or that we failed to have a certified housing element.
And vulnerable.
And vulnerable, right. So, to date, the jurisdictions that the state has pursued with, penalties have been those states that are, actively flaunting housing laws, right? So your Huntington Beaches, your Beverly Hills that are, right, kind of saying, we're not going to comply, we're going to fight you, that kind of thing. I don't know, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong or if I overstep, but I haven't yet seen, the state really make an effort to go after jurisdictions that are making a good faith effort to comply and to get into compliance. But I also don't want to run the risk of being at the pointy end of that spear, the longer we hang out there.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the statements that the ARB made was if we go with the 35-foot, that they wouldn't be able to, they'd have to count the elevator and the other architectural elements. And I think that's a deal breaker.
So under the current zoning code, architectural projections, including things like an elevator tower or a stair tower, are currently allowed to exceed our height limits at 30 feet. And we did not include anything in this MU zone district that would deviate from that. So right under this kind of proposed scenario, you could have a building up to 35 feet, and you could still have an elevator tower or a stair tower that could exceed that 35-foot limit for that unique architectural projection.
Right. Okay, thanks. I'd like to know, if possible, what's the environmental constraints with Lot 9?
So, through the chair, Commissioner Moyer, Lot 9 is the vacant site out there on Cindy Lane, right at the bend. It started its life, so far as I can tell, originally as a flood control basin.
Right.
And a number of years ago, flood control quit-claimed their easement that covered the entirety of the property back to the property owner, which is the owned by LinkedIn, I believe, now.
Right.
And we don't know for certain that there's environmental constraints on there, but we think that because it was used as a flood control basin and it's never been developed, there is the potential for there to be either wetland habitat out there and or coastal sage scrub. So it's never been mapped to my knowledge, but we've just flagged it, the fact that it's underdeveloped or undeveloped and has some semblance of native vegetation out there, that there may be some constraints on what can be done there.
Because Mr. Schott had bought that, and I talked to him, and he just said the same thing. He said there's environmental constraints, but he didn't know what they were.
Yeah, I don't know if any current or previous owners had ever engaged a biologist to do a more thorough study. We just based off kind of our very peripheral site visits, it seems like there's potential for some constraint out there.
Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I just had a couple, hopefully, quick questions. So around this new zoning designation ordinance, there's two pieces. There's a mixed-use residential component, and there's a residential-only component. And, the residential-only component, is sort of what's new for us. Most of our other overlay stuff is all, a combined mixed use, commercial is required. So that's typically what we've been used to dealing with is any of these sites where we've allowed residential, they're required to have some commercial development. And the way it's written now in this new ordinance, that carries on that same tradition. So if you're going to have any commercial component to your development, the way it's written now, that commercial component would be required to be at least 80% of the ground floor street frontage component of the project. So that's how it is now. And my question is, did you consider, for example, the Site 7 or the Eugenia Place sites where we may prefer a residential-only development, but there may be an interest in some small commercial component, neighborhood market, some corner of the property being commercial, where that's my question. Was that considered? Because right now that would be prohibited. You're either all in or it's residential only.
Chair LaFevers, yes, and maybe by way of answering this, just a little bit of kind of background is helpful here as to how we got here. So, under the existing general plan, there are provisions in both the general commercial land use area and the research development industrial area, which are the two areas of the land use map that we're focusing on right now for possible rezones. There are provisions existing in both of those land use categories for mixed-use development. In those circumstances, there's some language in the general plan that says in the situation of a mixed-use development, the commercial portion either needs to be dominant, essentially. And the way to get there on a mixed-use development is either by having more of the square footage devoted to the commercial use, or by having the project read as if it's commercial by dedicating the ground floor, street facade, so to speak, to that commercial use. And so that's what we were trying to address with this 80% requirement for the street facade in a mixed-use development was relating still to that policy language of, in a mixed-use project, the majority of the ground floor facing the street needs to be commercial in nature. It's not to say that we couldn't, massage that number a little bit. Again, 80% was kind of our proposal, with the intention, I think at the time, of thinking primarily of Carpinteria Avenue sites, of wanting that bulk or all of that ground floor facade to remain commercial. So not dissimilar from what you would see in mixed-use projects on Linden Avenue or on Carpinteria Avenue, where we have, ground floor is all commercial and residential is upstairs or behind. So that was kind of what we were thinking. I think, that percentage, right, that 80% figure is flexible to some degree, so long as we can make a connection that we're still remaining consistent with that policy language for a mixed-use development. Separately, right, and this is kind of maybe getting a little bit off of your question, but there's also allowances in the general plan under certain circumstances for residential-only development in these land use categories of general commercial and research development. And it's those allowances that we're then basing the option for residential-only development in this new mixed-use zone upon. So that's how we end up with this sort of flexible zone district that would allow a developer, in most cases, to do either a residential-only project or a mixed-use project. But if they do the mixed-use project, then they have to make sure that ground floor component reads or functions primarily as commercial.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, it sounds like, it's certainly something that is part of the complexities of making this all work, so I understand that. And I guess one other semi-related question has to do with setbacks. So, we know we're establishing sort of fixed setbacks by which if you meet them, you meet them. And so we have a 5-foot front yard, front lot setback, 15 feet on Via Real, built in now. And I'm just wondering if it was considered during your work on this that a third category might be necessary for residential only in, for example, the sites that we're considering on Eugenia, where, if you've got if those go residential only, then, is it appropriate to have a larger setback on the front for residential versus commercial, right? So I guess that's my question, is 5 foot, would we want residential only development 5 foot away from the sidewalk, or would we want to consider a larger setback for residential only? Wouldn't apply to those areas, design area 2, downtown T, right? That's already prescribed because you're going to have commercial. But for areas where you could go residential only, my question is, was it considered? Does it add complexity?
Chair LaFevers, it's certainly something we could look into. I think we did spend a bit of time noodling over what the appropriate setbacks should be for this mixed-use zone district based on a number of different scenarios. And what kind of guided the 5-foot front setback for, the majority of the sites which are in the downtown was trying to mirror sort of the established setback pattern that's allowed in our commercial areas, which is where these rezoned sites are focused primarily, right? And so currently, commercial projects or mixed-use projects in the downtown have a 5-foot front setback requirement. And so that was what we landed on as the basis here. And I certainly understand your point that now if this would allow for a residential-only project, should that perhaps be developed to a more residential character with maybe a little bit more of a buffer from the street? And that's certainly something we could consider if that's the direction that your commission directs us to go in. I think for us, again, just recognizing the flexibility of the zone district and the potential that you could have, sites side by side, let's say on Eugenia, for example, one maybe that develops in a mixed-use context and one that develops in a residential-only context. We thought, perhaps in terms of, kind of just having a consistency in character and type of development, that having standardized setbacks made sense here.
Okay. Thank you.
One small more.
Okay. Go ahead, Jane.
Is this a true statement? If these rezonings will offer the property owner more options to build on their property, more options or fewer? Or does it pan out equally?
Through the chair, Commissioner Benefield. This is a little bit of a tricky one. I suppose that the way to think about this is that it may provide different options rather than more options, right? So some of these sites, for example, that are currently zoned commercial could be developed under existing zoning with a commercial-only project or a mixed-use project. Under this mixed-use zoning, it would instead flip-flop to you could still do a mixed-use project, or you could now do a residential-only project. So, it's not necessarily more options, it's just different options.
Okay.
The other point I would make is that there isn't anything in this proposed zoning district that would force an existing use that becomes nonconforming to be phased out, right? So if you had, for example, a commercial property that was in a commercial use that was rezoned to mixed use, and you didn't have any intention here in the near term to terminate your use or to change what you're doing there, you could continue to do so. But where this rezone would place limitations on a property owner is when or if that property owner came forward with a proposal to redevelop their site into something else. At that point, we would say, your options are limited to what's allowed under the new mixed-use zoning.
Thank you. All right.
David?
Yes, I forgot one other issue with the design standards. The design standards, unless I missed something, address rooftop open space and provide for a setback from the property line of 15 feet. As these are objective design standards leading to basically ministerial permit, is there, and usually when we see a project of any size, we can look at conditions of approval and apply them as discretionary conditions of approval. What I'm concerned about is amplified noise on a new big building in a residential area. I mean, I recognize it would be residential use, not a commercial use, but nevertheless, can we put a condition or a standard on that without a permit?
Right, so Vice Chair Allen, maybe one clarification and then I can answer your question, right? So only a subset of the projects in this new zone district would qualify for the ministerial permitting process, right? It's only those ones that agree to provide that minimum 20% share of lower income. If they do, and if they meet the other standards, we would still have the ability to apply standard project conditions of approval to a project, but we just wouldn't have necessarily the ability to be exercising discretion in creating, project by project specific type conditions. So if we have, if we crafted standard conditions that are going to apply to all ministerial projects about limitations on rooftop noise, for example, then I think that's something that we could impose and enforce.
I think it's something important for council to consider in this next round. It's been a subject always with any new building that proposes rooftop uses, even in residential areas, and I think we don't want to overlook that issue.
That's good input. Thanks.
Okay, that's probably enough questions for the moment. So let's keep moving. There'll be opportunity for additional questions. So I'm going to open the public hearing. I have a few speaker slips, so I'll call those in order and that I received them. And we don't have a huge crowd, so I don't anticipate time limits being a significant issue, but I would just ask for you to be considerate of the time as you speak, and we'll give you as much time as you need within reason. So with that, I think first speaker, Laurel Perez.
Wake up.
Oh, feels good to stand up. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Laurel Perez, and I'm with SEPS Land Use Consulting. And we are here tonight.
Is your mic on? Green light?
Looks like it's on. Oh, no, it isn't. I
There you
take that
go.
back. Okay. I'll start over. My apologies. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Laurel Perez with SEPS Land Use Consulting, here this evening on behalf of Victor Schaff, longtime business employer and property owner and resident here in Carpinteria, who owns the property on Carpinteria Avenue, identified as site number 21 on your candidate opportunity sites in your staff report. It is the home of S&S Seeds building and the vacant industrial site to the east of the S&S Seeds building. And we are here tonight to ask your consideration to include the Site 21 on your Phase 1 rezone effort. Right now, staff is proposing that it be part of Phase 2. We're asking that you consider including it as part of the Phase 1 rezone effort, and I'll explain the reasons why in a minute. If we could switch. There you go. Here's an image of the site that I was just describing. Site 21 is zoned Industrial Research Park and is comprised of 2 parcels totaling just over 6 acres in size. 6155 Carp Ave is developed with the approximately 46,500 square foot S&S Seeds warehouse operations building that was constructed in the early 1960s and has tremendous potential for redevelopment. And 6175 Carp Ave is an undeveloped site to the east of the S&S Seeds parcel, and it's sandwiched between S&S Seeds and the Industrial Business Park that is further east, as you can see on the screen. If these 2 parcels are developed with housing, and you can go to the, go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you very much. The site does have the potential to provide between approximately 120 to 190 homes on a major transportation corridor within walking, riding, and busing distance to literally hundreds of jobs. And go ahead and next slide, please. Thank you. In contrast to Site 21, many of the downtown sites that are being recommended for consideration for rezone in the Phase 1 rezone are fully developed, many with newer buildings, profitable businesses, and several have long-term leases. This combination severely impedes the likelihood for redevelopment of many of these downtown sites, particularly redeveloping them for affordable housing. We're concerned that relying on many of these already developed sites to meet your RHNA requirements is risky. The notion that these properties will be redeveloped with housing, including affordable housing, within the 8-year RHNA cycle is unrealistic. In many cases, the occupied structures would need to be demolished to make way for the densities that are being proposed. And when non-vacant sites are included in the housing element, the state requires that the jurisdiction provide substantial evidence supporting the realistic development capacity for redeveloping these sites to provide housing. So we're concerned about that. I'm going to focus in on just 3 of them. Our team has studied the financial feasibility of redeveloping the developed sites, and we found that redevelopment would result in a loss of value of nearly $350 million for these downtown sites. We submitted some material to your commission in a longer presentation, and there's a table in there that you can refer to that identifies the analysis that we completed. We're suggesting that without more careful analysis, it is unclear how many of the developed sites in the downtown area on the recommended Phase 1 rezone list will realistically result in housing, particularly affordable housing, which means that the state may once again find the city housing element out of compliance, keeping the door open on builder's remedy, which is presently open right now, allowing developers to come in and propose housing on sites that are not zoned for housing. Okay, so let's go ahead and, this is Site 10. So in looking at Site 10, this is the site where Allstate Insurance and several other businesses exist. This happens to be a Tobes property. It is identified for rezone in Phase 1 and with the potential to provide 21 units. And if you could go to the next slide. Kernal Collective has studied 3 of these downtown sites just as samples to look at what housing development might look like. You'd have to demolish that existing structure. It's not able to be repurposed for housing. And in order to get approximately 10, say 12 units, you're looking at going up to that maximum height of 35 feet, which is being proposed in the MU zone that's before you today. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This obviously doesn't take into consideration the objective design standards that were recently proposed by your ARB, for the setbacks that we were talking about earlier. This is simply a massing study. And we're looking at this because we're not only pointing out the unlikelihood for redeveloping some of these more recently developed sites that are highly functioning with long-term leases and long-term tenants that are doing quite well, but also the impact that redeveloping these sites for housing in the downtown core could cause just from an aesthetic standpoint, a physical standpoint. Next slide, please. This site is the Site 12. It's the location of the IRS building, the on-track FedEx delivery service, and ENS trading. Go ahead, next slide, please. Wait, is this the one? Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is still on Site 10. Keep going if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Now, Site 12. Site 12 identified in the Phase 1 rezone. Again, a site that's developed with relatively newer buildings occupied by our IRS, as I said, and a couple of other tenants that are long-term tenants, not likely to change over within the next 8-year cycle. Go ahead to the next slide. Here they are, ENS Trading, On-Track Dropbox, and the IRS Center. Going to Site 15. Site 15, so this is still Site 12. Again, you can see the development out there, quite nice. It's a beautiful, business park, office park, unlikely to be redeveloped to housing. Site 15, similar. It's the home of Carl's Jr. It's under a long-term lease, which will not expire between now and your 8-year cycle. So it does leave potential for the sort of upside-down L shape, if you will, at the corner there. Next slide, please. We looked at this area, identifying the potential for homes on the upper part of the upside-down L. And you can see there's potential there. There's potential in the stone yard as well to the left. But again, looking at a massing study, you can see the kinds of effects. Go ahead to the next slide. That developing in these areas may have on the downtown corridor. Next slide. Next slide, please. There you go. That's a 35-foot height massing. So in contrast, next slide, to several of these downtown sites, Site 21 has a willing property owner who's interested in developing workforce housing near employers, transit, and public amenities, located on a major transit corridor. These are criteria that your staff has used to identify potential rezone sites for both public transportation, easy access to downtown, and the 101 on-ramps, and within walking distance to dozens of R&D office employers. Next slide, please. Because of the infill nature of this site, and the vacant parcel in particular, it will be developed either with a new R&D office building, as allowed by the current zone, or with housing, if allowed. And we believe providing housing, go ahead, please, next slide, at this location will have far greater benefits for the community than another R&D office building. Next slide. So we've studied it. This is what a commercial, typical R&D office building would look like, taking into account the environmentally sensitive habitat that's been mapped on this property by a prior development proposal and the setback from that ESH. So you have a much larger structure closer to Carp Ave. Again, we think that providing housing in lieu of its current zoning, MRP zoning, which would afford this type of a development, would provide a much greater benefit to the community. Next slide. We've studied developing Site 21 and determined that enough residential units can be constructed to truly move the needle toward providing required housing during your RENA cycle, while still avoiding environmentally sensitive habitat. Go ahead, next slide. That would be the R&D office building. Next slide, please. This is just a very conceptual site plan, identifying what housing would look like. This is a significant portion of housing, respecting the environmentally sensitive habitat that's been mapped out on the site, extending the bluff-top trail system, and opening up view corridors through the site. Next slide, please. This is what a housing concept might look like instead of the R&D office building. Rezoning Site 21 does not require a general plan or coastal land use plan amendment to permit residential development. It is on the list of sites for your consideration. It was included in the CEQA addendum. And for these reasons, we're asking that you include Site 21 in the Phase 1 rezone effort. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the view across from Viola Fields, of course, looking east. And that's the S&S Seeds building in the foreground. If it were to be converted to housing, go ahead, next slide. Here's a concept of what that might look like. Again, we're asking that you consider including Site 21 in your Phase 1. You have a willing and committed landowner who wants to deliver a high-quality workforce housing project in lieu of R&D office at a location near employment, helping to reduce GHG emissions and achieve other city goals. And we believe that inclusion of Site 21 can provide an important and valuable option to help ensure that the next iteration of the housing element is certified by the state, closing the door on builder's remedy. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Much appreciated. Okay, next up is Catherine Logue.
Can I bring my daughter-in-law? We're in business together.
You may. You have the floor.
Thank you. She's quicker than I am.
Thank you very much for the time. Would you like me to start?
Yes, we would
Okay.
like to follow in the same footsteps as.
Whoever's speaking is gonna have to be right in front of that microphone.
Okay, I'm Kathy Logue. This is Christina Logue. We have number 20 on your list.
Yeah, I don't know if you can bring that up for us. Parcel or
That would be
site
great.
number 20.
We have 8 pieces of property there. We are a willing landlord. We are a willing developer. We've developed 70 units of affordable housing in Los Angeles. We can bring that here.
So for a little bit of context, my family has been developing, whether you've noticed us or not, in Carpinteria for about 100 years. If you've ever had a delicious burger or a shake from the spot, we're very proud to have called that ours since the day it was opened. So we're not very much in the spotlight in the city of Carpinteria, although you probably had a good meal. And in 2019, there was a changeover in our family, and development moved from the patriarch who passed into our hands. And it is our hope to continue the legacy of the family to develop affordable housing as we have for this entire period. So as Kathy mentioned, we have over 70 units in Los Angeles that are geared towards low income, and that is demonstrated on the range from extremely to low. And on Site 20, we are seeing a lot of mixed use developer, commercial use moving in next to us. And there was an old building there, Reg's Bait Shop. I don't know if folks are familiar with that business. It's closed down for a number of years since Reg left, but this site was included in Phase 2, and we are asking for it to be included in Phase 1 so that we can start development to help with this 8-year goal for housing and commercial in the overall plan. I think the questions you guys have asked has been incredibly enlightening. I think we'll be interested in perhaps services we've seen tonight, and so how do we sort of engage with that to be responsible developers in the area? There is currently rental properties on that land now, but we have vacant lots surrounding this entire piece. There's actually 1.94 acres of vacancy happening, and so we would be interested in looking at the environmental impact, but also if the forward-facing properties, the ones specifically included, this 0.77 acres can be pushed up into the mixed use would be really helpful for us to kind of put something more comprehensive for this land that's gone undeveloped for an extremely long time in this neighborhood, right near the camping, and we're just seeing a lot more movement in the area. There is also a development closer to the beach, if you're familiar, the Lima Bean Factory, which I think is already sort of hitting our height cap for the area. So what we're looking to develop is further inland from that, but not by much.
We would love it if you would take that piece of greenery that you see behind the yellow rectangle and add that to your list of zoning properties. We have all the greenery that you can see on there on both sides of that street.
We are interested in submitting additional parcels for this project, if that's an opportunity for consideration.
They are vacant and ready to build on.
I think they've been overlooked.
Yes.
It sure
Regis
is,
Bait Shop.
yeah. Which hasn't been used in quite some time, and we like to see it come back to life, especially with all the amazing things going on around it. I don't know if you've been to Santa Barbara Hives, but they are doing amazing things, and so we would like to could kind of continue to develop with our neighbors and keep pace.
Please put us into the pot. Yes, ready to go.
Yeah, so that's actually all ours as well. That was not included in this letter that we received from the city, and we would love to submit those properties as well. So we'll follow up and figure out the process to do that. But for tonight's purpose, we certainly want to at least include Site 20.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
On Site 20, what would you be building? Would you knock everything down to build these housing units, or would you? I'm a little confused because the Santa Barbara Hive.
Oh, no, yeah. So Santa Barbara Hives is not ours. Yeah. So we're everybody next to Santa Barbara Hives. So Regis Bait Shop. If we are able to include the lot behind it is about 1.5 acres. But actually, for some reason, we're included with Santa Barbara Hives, but there's actually a cutoff between Regis Bait Shop. That's all of us. So we would be demolishing an abandoned building, actually a condemned building, and a 2-residence duplex in lieu of much larger amount of units and potential commercial opportunities.
So it's a part of Site 20.
Yeah, it's a part of Site 20, yeah.
Got it.
And isn't the city water treatment plant somewhere in there?
It's behind us on 6th. If you keep going back on 6th Avenue, yes, the water treatment is on the other side of that big lush green forest.
Where you want to put housing, right?
Yeah, well, we'll try and submit the lot in front of that. That's correct. So that's lot 7, yeah. So the big green broccoli in the back. Yeah, that's right. So that's right in front of it. We would like to submit that as well, and we'll find a way to have it included either in phase 1 or 2.
Is there some kind of historic sycamore tree in there?
Great question. We'll have to talk to our environmental friends. Yeah, before it's included in a yellow square, we'll certainly talk and have it studied.
It's across 6th Street, and it's a little hilly, and there's a lot of trees in there. Is a very historic sycamore tree, I believe.
It's further east.
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's further east side.
Good.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
I'll have a hamburger.
Did you want
Appropriate
to
to ask a question
ask
to
for
staff on this?
clarification?
Well, from staff, just whether the adjacent property indicated by the speakers has been looked at.
Through the chair, Vice Chair Allen. So we are aware that the Logue family owns that additional green area where you can see that white boxy 2-story building there. We were aware that the Logue family owns that and additionally owns the broccoli-shaped parcel as it was described across 6th Street there. We did not include them for consideration for rezoning for a couple reasons. Maybe the broccoli piece parcel is easier to tackle. The reason that looks like broccoli is that's an entire willow forest, and so it's designated as environmentally sensitive habitat. It's been previously found by the sanitary district's biologists to be deemed a riparian woodland, so a remnant of the Carpinteria Creek watershed that's been separated off by development, but is 100% covered in willow forest. And so we don't anticipate that would be developable under the Coastal Act because of extra protection policies. And in fact, a number of years ago, reflecting that, the city downzoned that property from, I can't recall what it was previously designated for, to low-density residential, to single-family residential, effectively recognizing that there's limited potential there because of the environmentally sensitive habitat. Going across the street there to the south side of 6th Street, we did consider this site, and we went back and forth on it. My recollection is that that site also was downzoned years ago from what it had previously been zoned for. Again, reflecting in part some potential for willow forest and Esha up there on the corner there of 6th and Olive. And then also, concerns from the sanitary district at the time about the, potential nuisance impacts, if you will, of having residential immediately adjacent to the sanitary treatment facility. And so that was something, that still has some residential capacity. It's already reflected and accounted for in the housing element as a vacant, developable site that has some capacity, but it's at a lower residential density than what the Logues would be requesting if it were included for rezoning as part of this housing element. So I think currently, under the existing zoning, that back area is currently zoned PRD 10, so up to 10 units per acre. And if we were to include it in this rezone, right, it would jump up to 20 to 25 units per acre density. So effectively a doubling in allowable density for that back area there.
While we're clarifying, I noticed in the staff report, there was a reference to Site 20, that even if it was incorporated, it would not somehow help us with our RENA numbers. Can you explain that?
Yes, Chair Lefevers. We actually did want to include it since it is kind of a downtown site that is easy to rezone. But anything under an acre, even at the densities we're talking about, HCD considers not potentially low and very low income potential, because to get a good low income housing complex, you tend to need a little more area. So they only count it as moderate, as shown there. 11 moderate income units is what they counted in our housing element. But it doesn't hurt anything to include it, and we would welcome that in your recommendation.
So why wasn't it included?
Simply because it wouldn't further the goal.
But there are several under an acre site size.
Yes. One other one was included in Phase 1, Site 18, right? 16. That is less than an acre. And it just right there across the street from IF Day, and it just it still wouldn't count as low income units, but it would still make sense to include it in our rezones. But again, that could be included or not included per your commission's recommendation. Some of these, it was difficult to decide what the cutoff is.
Before we get too deep into this, we still have the public comment period open, so we can, unless there's something urgent.
Well, kind of while we're on the topic, just to offer the question, not necessarily being even answered here, but before I forget it when we come back, is simply given the owner's willingness to move forward with the rezoning, it would seem, though maybe it would be a little bit difficult from permitting and so on, that if you could get an acre by carving out the portions that that may present an EHSH issue, and the other issue was sanitary proximity, and that would make a whole lot of difference whether there's 10 residences in there or 20 residents in there. If it's an issue, you would want to screen for motors by that building frontage, no matter how many units are there. So I'm just thinking maybe a little creativity in getting that one into a usable full acre.
Plus the Palm Lofts is right there by the sanitary. So you got a whole bunch of units living right there.
Yeah, it was an issue when Palm Loft came along, and it didn't seem to stop that project.
Okay. We can come back to that as well. Let's move forward with public comments, and thank you for your comments, the Logue family. Peter Grace is next up.
Good evening. I'm Peter Grace. I and my family run some nursery property on Via Real, and then just over city limits on Casitas Pass Road. It's about 30 acres in all. We've been farming here about 50 years. What we're asking for is to have 5,800 Via Real, which I think is Site 1 on the list. I can't quite recall, but would like to have that added to Phase 1 as well. I think it's a really attractive property for development in that it's going to, potentially add upwards of 250 units, given that the Phase 1 arena figure is pretty well short of what's ultimately needed. I think it makes sense to move forward with this property, which is a pretty chunky, would make up a pretty chunky piece of the requirement. If you don't know where it is, it's almost directly across the highway from here. I think it's great that it's north of the highway. We're not going to have nearly the same sort of coastal habitat consequences. And then if you kind of know the arrangement there, whatever we end up developing there wouldn't create any obstructing views for anyone else already sort of in the region. So would ask that you have a look at that and consider including it in Phase 1, because I think ultimately this property is going to be a huge part of the solution to the housing issue in Carpinteria. And just the reality of the matter is I think that the sooner we get started on it, the sooner we can actually get it to a point where it's solving problems, some of the problems we have in Carpinteria here, rather than saving it for Phase 2 while we're trying to chip away at some of these other smaller properties that have currently been recommended for Phase 1.
Where is it?
Almost directly across the highway, so I think it's like the San Roque Mobile Estates to the west, and then there's an avocado grower next to us. Then we're the container nursery, trees and shrubs, and then there's some greenhouse. And then actually, I think that's the city limit right there, if I'm not mistaken.
Norman's Nursery?
Yeah.
You're at Norman's?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And then, so that's our property within city limits, and then less than a mile directly north on Casitas Pass Road. Not relevant for this conversation, but we are committed to continuing to farm here, so we'd still be in the neighborhood. But that site, we're Site 2, and then our neighbor, I guess, is the avocado grower at Site 1.
I'm sorry, are you Site 1 or Site 2?
We're Site 2. That's 5,800. Yeah, I think that's almost directly across the highway from here. So it's a good 16, 17 acre parcel, which again, if we're going to hit these RENA numbers, I don't see how you kind of can patch it together with everything else we've talked about without making some serious aggressive progress with 1 and 2 here. And to that end, let's get started early. Let's get started in Phase 1 if we can.
Very good.
How many acres could be on it? I'm sorry, how many housing units? I don't.
Yeah, so we're about 16 acres. Things you got to take into account. You need a little buffer from the creek there, and so that would probably take out, say, 3 or 4 acre buffer, and then with setbacks and respecting the neighbors on either side, you're probably talking 10, 11, 12 acres to build on. And so if we're using these figures of 20 units per acre, that puts you into the 200s fairly efficiently.
Wow, okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. And just while we're on the subject of Site 2, question for staff. I believe, please clarify that that site would require a general plan amendment to incorporate. Is that correct?
Chair LaFevers, that's correct. That is why we did not include it in phase one.
So that makes it problematic to even attempt to incorporate that site. And that's the reason
Correct.
is ag zoning, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that site's currently zoned agriculture.
And the land use designation is also agriculture. And so we would have to change the land use designation as well, which is on the proposal for the general plan update, but that's a bigger process.
Right. Okay. So proposed for phase two, certainly an option for the future, but not within the timeline that perhaps that we're looking at here for the phase one project. But okay. Patrick O'Connor.
Thank you, commissioners and staff. I'll make it brief. Wanted to also mention that I am on the Architectural Review Board, so I'm going to offer a little bit of nuance from the feedback from that's in your reports and maybe not in the reports. But first off, I wanted to just say to the staff, this is really outstanding, very difficult work that's been done in an awful short amount of time. I mean, for two people to come into a new group and take this on is unbelievable. So hats off to the staff for getting this done. Part of the reason why I think this conversation is so lengthy tonight is part of that process, I'll use the analogy of walking down a plank. We've been walking down this plank of the general plan, the housing element, and all these different things for some time. And out of respect for the staff, a lot of this work has been extending the length of that plank that we're walking down. And I think we're finally now walking back instead of lengthening it. So my suggestion is approve this thing and get on with it. Partly because the nuance about the design criteria or the objective design elements of this can be changed later on. And I think they should be changed later on. One of the nuances about this zoning district, most zoning districts are a patchwork of locations. This one particularly is a patchwork of locations. These sites are scattered all over the place. And design criteria are intended to be around neighborhoods. So, the odd thing is you've got one set of design criteria for a whole array of properties in very, very different locations. So you're not going to have the same criteria for doing something in the industrial park and converting a building into an apartment as you would in the beach neighborhood or the downtown T. So I think you're going to be back at the drawing board on these criteria anyway. So don't get hung up about it. Let's just get on with it and come back to the work later. The other point about process is because we walked down this plank and the plank kept getting longer and now we're backing down, we didn't have the opportunity to do the joint review. There was a committee that was established several years ago that was supposed to be part planning commission, part ARB, and part staff to do what we're doing tonight in 2 hours. And we just didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I think we should still do that as these opportunities to refine come up. And the last comment I would make is there's been a lot of conversations with property owners. I think it's great that a few have come forward aggressively to participate. But I think these boards and commissions should be part of those discussions. I've mentioned it a couple times in the past. I think the staff does all they can to spread themselves into these really delicate, difficult conversations, and I think the appointed board should be part of those. So that's my feedback.
Thank you. Okay, that's, I believe, all the speaker slips I have. Anybody else in the audience like to speak on this item? Now's your chance. Anybody on Zoom?
Nobody on Zoom, Chair LaFevers. Thank you. We just had someone raise their hand. So I'm going to go and put this one through. This is Augustin Gonzalez. Make sure your mic is on, Augustin, and you can go ahead and talk.
Hi, this is Augustine. Can you hear me good?
We can hear you.
All right, so I'm representing Site 16, 4621 Carpinteria Avenue. My dad has owned this property since the 70s. He's operated Gonzalez Welding and now Joe Gonzalez Welding on this property. Um, we, after hearing the propositions from Site 20 and 21, and also number 2, and understanding the issues with maybe putting them into consideration, I would still push for putting them into consideration and potentially taking our site out of consideration just because we don't really plan on going anywhere. I went to college in the hopes of coming home and running the shop for much longer. We've done extensive work for Carpinteria High and for the city of Carpinteria alongside the Parks Department. We've also been operating inside of Santa Barbara for a number of years. And I think, from what I understand, the rezoning of Site 16 wouldn't force us out, but I think it would have a better chance of getting pushed through. This whole thing would have a better chance of getting pushed through if we were just removed and maybe someone else was put into consideration in our stead.
Okay.
And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much for your input. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, any other hands on Zoom?
No more hands on Zoom. Thank you, Chair LaFevers.
Okay, thanks. Nick, I noticed we had an email submitted comment for the Gonzalez Welding property as well that was consistent with Augustine's comments. And it looks like we had a couple other public comments submitted by email. But did you have anything else you wanted to throw in before we bring it back?
Chair, I wanted to first acknowledge the receipt of those emailed public comments that we've circulated to you. I also did want to have an opportunity to just circle back to some of the comments that we heard here from the public. I know we had a chance to talk a little bit about Site 20 and how we ended up where we did with that site. I think we've answered your questions there. We're happy to answer more if we missed anything. And we also touched on Site 2 and the fact that that site being zoned and designated for agriculture would require a general plan amendment, which is a much bigger effort than what we're attempting to take on with these Phase 1 rezones, which are supposed to be the ones that do not require a general plan amendment. But we are committed to continuing to look at and consider Site 2 as part of the larger general plan update, which can look at and include changes to the land use map and accommodations for potential reuse of those sites in a different capacity. We didn't really have a chance to talk about Site 21, and I did want to spend just a little bit of time on that and give you a little bit of context of how we ended up in our present recommendation of not including this site. And I'd have to start by just saying we didn't come to this decision lightly. We went back and forth on this internally. I credit Laurel and her team for coming up with a really great proposal, for this site that could accommodate a significant number of dwelling units here. And really, what it came down to for us here was a couple of things. There's been historic feedback provided from the Planning Commission and the Council for previous redevelopment proposals on this site that, at least in the past, this hasn't been an area where the council was ready to throw in the towel on kind of preserving this area for office park uses. Right? We've seen proposals here previously for mixed use of office park and residential, and in all those scenarios, the council had been pretty much steadfast that they did not see this as an appropriate location for residential. And so we were trying to, in absence of having any feedback from decision makers to suggest otherwise, we were trying to remain consistent with that previous feedback that we've heard. I think also, there are some constraints on the site that Laurel did hint at. There is a considerable ESHA component to the undeveloped parcel there, which would both limit its developable capacity and may also, kind of gain the attention of Coastal Commission when it comes to changing the zoning there, and could slow down the inclusion of that site for rezoning or delay that rezoning effort. Likewise, it is also a site, perhaps our only site, that's mapped as being vulnerable to potential sea level rise impacts down the road from bluff face retreat. And again, that's something that is of concern to Coastal Commission, not to say it's insurmountable, but, for these reasons, we didn't see this site as the, quote unquote, low hanging fruit from a kind of a process standpoint in terms of getting through the Coastal Commission, local coastal plan amendment process. That being said, I do think that Laurel's team makes a compelling case for, a project that could be achieved there if there is support for considering residential development out there on the bluffs.
When's phase 2 gonna happen?
So we're currently working on the general plan update. We've just concluded sharing the administrative drafts of all of the elements with the general plan update committee. And our goal is to be ready to release a public draft of the complete general plan update in spring of next year. And along with that, we'll be kicking off the CEQA review for the environmental impact report that goes along with it. So it's realistically, it's probably still a couple years out from being completed and finalized, but it is targeted to occur within this housing element cycle. And so, barring some kind of unforeseen circumstance, this would, the inclusion of these other sites in phase 2 does create or add on additional capacity that we could take advantage of during this housing element cycle.
A question, and my apologies for not remembering or understanding when you presented adding the Lagunitas site to our list of sites. Were you proposing it be in phase 1 or phase 2?
Commissioner Allen, so we were offering that it could be available for inclusion in in phase 1. That being said, our recommendation was that, if that was something of interest to the commission, that it be considered in the context of in addition to the recommended sites rather than in lieu of some of the recommended sites. And the reason for that is because the property is under contract with a new buyer, and there's the potential that they could come in with a project sooner than later that might be different from what we would propose under the rezoning. And so we don't want to be reliant upon it in the event that we get a different type of project there.
Thanks, Nick. Additional clarification for Site 21. That's in the Coastal Commission Appeals Zone as well?
That's correct. It is in the appealable jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission.
Okay, all right. Another complication. And then for Site 16, which we heard from the property owners of Gonzalez Welding, that site incorporates more than just the Gonzalez Welding property, right? It's also Clementine's?
Correct.
And a couple other properties there?
Yeah, I think there's maybe 3 parcels in total. So it's the Gonzalez Welding property, it's Clementine's, and then it's also a single-family residence there that's at the east end of the rectangle, or the left side of the rectangle. I know the Clementine's property is either up for sale or recently changed hands. But as we've noted, similar to Site 20, this site overall is so small that we can't, for the purposes of planning for Arena, count it towards low income, but we could count it towards moderate income if it were to be included.
Okay. So if it were to be removed, as requested by one of the property owners, it doesn't impact the numbers significantly that we're trying to achieve?
Correct. I don't think it would result in any kind of scenario where we would dip below our minimum requirements for, say, the moderate income category. And it's, maybe worth also noting, right, that even if we did exclude this site, individual property owners of those individual parcels, like the Clementine's parcel, for example, could still pursue redevelopment under the existing commercial zoning and perhaps even pursue a mixed-use project. So just because we don't just because we don't include it in the rezones doesn't mean there isn't still potential capacity there for redevelopment in the future under existing zoning.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I haven't yet, so I will now officially close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. And I will, before we go to discussion deliberation, I'll just ask commissioners if we need do we need a short break before we proceed?
Oh, let's finish it.
Okay, we won't leave, but let's just take like a 2-minute recess. Okay. So I'll just stay put.
Take the sillies on.
Okay, we're back. We're reconvening the Planning Commission meeting, and public comment period has been concluded. The item is now back before the commission for discussion, deliberation, and path forward. So I'd entertain comments from commissioners. Anybody want to start?
Me.
John?
I'll start. Because I've been last all night, so
Okay.
it's about time.
Right.
I mean, you guys have corralled the
Poor
whole
thing.
evening. Yeah. Well, my feeling is that with all due respect, with all the work that you've done, everything, phase one is really weak. It's just weak. You know, it's not buildable. Most of them are already developed, and
Could you move closer to the microphone?
oh, I'm sorry. Most of them are already developed, like what's been made clear. Most of them have no desire to do anything with their property. So, I think including the Laganisa property would be advantageous. I think I would be into that. I know how sensitive Site 21 is, so I'm not going to go there. But that's, and then as far as the design elements, I don't think we should play around with them. Like, you can move them later, but right now we need to get it approved. So whatever we need to do to get this thing approved right away, that's what I want to do. That's enough out of me.
Thank you, John. David.
Go next. I agree with Commissioner Moyer. I want to see it move forward rapidly for the benefit of us all. I also want to thank you, Mindy, Megan, and Nick. I know this has been a lot of work, and you've done a great job parsing out, and in my view, the priorities, and in my view, downtown, to the extent it is appropriate to go for the new zoning, is where we should start, and that's where you started. So I thank you for, I know an awful lot of thought went into it. I also agree that we should add, as a separate item as recommended by staff, the Lagunitas potential acreage. It may help us if HCD isn't happy with one or more of the sites. I wish general plan amendments sometimes could move forward faster, because clearly both sites 1 and 2 are where we're going to see development. The city has resisted, for good reason, rezoning of agricultural lands for all the years I've lived here and near here, and but that's what's going to go, and I have to acknowledge that. And it's the state. I think we should make clear to the public and those who are concerned about those losses. I had a request that I ask the question. I think I know the answer, but I think you'd like to hear it from staff. What consideration, and this is an aside, what consideration at all has ever been given to the main school property for development as housing? I know it's school district property. I'll let you answer, though.
Vice Chair Allen, so as part of the housing element exercise, we did reach out to the school district to see if the main school site or any of the other sites that they own might be amenable to some kind of housing component, whether even if it was dedicated to workforce housing for teachers or other school district staff. And the very succinct response that we got from the school district was that they weren't interested.
And did they give any succinct or otherwise explanation?
Just that they felt like they didn't have any available land that they could afford to give up or make available to other uses, and it felt like a non-starter, and so we just left it alone.
It's not the first time that I think our relationship with the school district has not been the best, and I think that the efforts made by the city have generally been as good as you can do. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not happy. Let's see. In terms of other comments, I agree. I'm do want to pass along the concern over rooftop amplification to the council for inclusion or not, but I would not want to see it or anything else slow the process of moving this forward. And I recognize, I'd just like to acknowledge the concerns of the owners of owner of Site 16 and the longstanding business. I think what seems clear to me is that it really does not impact their use or proposed future use, and ultimately increases the value of the property to include it in the rezone, but I'd leave that thought to other commissioners. I'm not sure how fully understood that is by the property owner. So I'm ambivalent as to whether to lose Site 16 or not. I would say keep it if it provided low-income housing, but it does not. And I think that's the extent of my comments.
Thanks, David. Jane?
Yeah. It should be noted that the housing doesn't have to be built there. It just provides the opportunity to build it. So the, what was that, Site 16? They're pretty safe for a long time, but maybe we should remove it just because it doesn't have the size we need and exchange it for the Lagunitas, which is which site?
It's not on there, but it's...
Oh, no wonder I couldn't see it. It's not there. I think we should include that right now, regardless of any, applications that come in, because they will anyway. And then Norm should, okay, S&S seeds. Yeah, that is going to be a real battle to build housing there, community-wise, politically. But is the owner going to build this housing, or is he going to sell it to build housing? I just wonder.
Our Chair, are we okay with opening up public comment to hear from?
No, we're not, because the answer to that isn't necessarily relevant to...
I'm not relevant. I sound like the tea guy. Okay. I think, okay, those are my thoughts on the sites. Otherwise, I think your choices are good ones. Just for the Lagunitas one, I think that should go, and then the welding area, because it just isn't big enough. Secondly, I think your objective standards are the best you can do. It looks like you've taken them out of the zoning code and just honed them for what you need in this instance. So I would approve it, and hope we get it passed, and then refine whatever we have to do later. I'm done. I'm not going to say another word.
Thank you, Jane. Catherine?
I would say, I think full speed ahead, that the sooner that we send this off to the parties, the Coastal Commission and HCD, the sooner we can move on to actually address the problem of housing in our city. Mm-hmm. And one question that did occur to me, you said early in the meeting that in order to be eligible for state and federal funding for housing, we needed to get the housing element settled. I believe you said that? Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
And so if we get it settled, does that mean that we can then try to get federal and state money to help us build? I don't know how all these pieces work, but developers have only an interest in low-cost housing as much to the extent it can allow them to build more market housing. But to really address the numbers that we're talking about here, the money has to come from, it would seem to me, from the state and the federal government.
Commissioner Slant, so yes, if we, one of the first, kind of thresholds, if you will, to being eligible for state funding for housing projects is to have a certified housing element. So if we clear that hurdle, that's the first that's needed. There are other actions that local jurisdictions can take that can make them more attractive for grant funding. So for example, there's something called a pro-housing designation, which requires a local jurisdiction to take certain actions to do so. But if you do it right, it then kind of streamlines or clears the way for improved access to grant funding. So yeah, the first bar is get that certified housing element. And if we did that, and if we were then able to pursue some grant funding, right, it could open up the door for maybe some kind of a public-private partnership where the city gets awarded a grant and is able to partner with, an affordable housing developer like a People's Self-Help Housing, as an example, or the Housing Authority of Santa Barbara to pursue, kind of some sort of joint public-private affordable housing project. We have some precedent for having done that in the past years ago where we had land that the city owned that they were able to bring to the table and help facilitate an expansion of the People's Self-Help Project. That's, one example of a successful public-private partnership in the past, but maybe there could be others in the future if we were to be able to acquire some state grant funding for affordable housing projects.
Then you end up with 100% affordable.
Right, that's how
that's where we want to go.
The rare circumstance or the rare path forward to achieve actual
Right.
truly 100%
Yeah.
affordable housing
This
projects.
20% thing, that's a ripoff. It's a ripoff. You don't get anything really. So I'm not happy with that, but
Let's vote.
Okay, so you're good with your comments?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, so I get a chance before we vote.
You're done.
It's clear that we have consensus, so clearly we're moving forward in a positive direction, and I think that's important. Very nice work by staff to pull all this together. There's a lot to it. I appreciate the simplicity that you've built into the details. So it's straightforward and is clear. Whether in the future we need to make adjustments, I think that can be, that can be guided by what we see coming forward under this new zone district in the future, and we'll have that opportunity. And so just a couple things to, I guess, pile on with regards to issues we've discussed. My preference, Site 16, my preference would be that it be removed. And if we want to put it as Phase 2, that's fine, but I think it should be removed from Phase 1. I would agree that the Lagunitas site, which is Site 5, would provide a significant amount of potential affordable units to hopefully help if there is concern about the reliance on some of the already developed sites that are downtown. I agree with other commissioners, or Commissioner Allen specifically, that I think our best focus for development of high density in Carpinteria perspective is downtown, right? We should put as much effort as we can to developing sites downtown for redevelopment at higher densities to meet these requirements. I don't know if we can get there without some of the sites on the outskirts, and I think the Site 5 is a logical choice to include in Phase 1 as a potential. So I'd suggest that be added. I am not in support of Site 21, and we can keep it as Phase 2 on this list. I think development of residential, especially residential only, in those parcels. There, you know, at least for me, I have not, there's been a number of proposals in the past. I have not supported those for a number of reasons. And I think there's better sites with less in Carpinteria than conceding residential on that part of the Bluffs area. Site 20 hasn't come up again in our discussions. I don't feel strongly necessarily one way or the other. We've had a request from a partial property owner that be included in phase one. I'm not sure about, I don't know, that side I'm not sure about. Phase one or phase two. Personally, I think we need to try to keep a hold of some of our, you know, locations that are available for commercial use, but I could go either way on Site 20. But right now it's phase two, so I haven't heard anybody else suggest that we change it to phase one, so I'm okay leaving it phase two. I would suggest that the name of the zone district be RMU, residential mixed use. I guess just for clarity, since it's come up and will probably come up at council, the 35-foot height restriction in this zone district, I think is appropriate. It's a significant increase over the existing limitations that we've lived with for decades, and we see what the you know what that looks like. You know, our 30-foot limit. We can see what the developments that are developed with that standard look like, and an additional 5 feet above that, I think is tolerable to the extent that it provides some realistic opportunities for denser development in the areas in these key specific areas that we've defined. So you know, it may be unpopular, but again, we're trying to we need to meet mandates. It's prudent for us as a city to do what's necessary to meet the mandates by the state. Anyway, I just wanted to go on record as supporting that 35-foot limit because I'm sure it's going to come up. And that's it. So with that, I'm happy to entertain more discussion. I think I heard at least a couple other commissioners support Site 5, Lagunitas. So I think we have consensus on that. I heard commissioners, what was the other one?
Removal of Site 16. Removal
of Site 16, right? So I guess we need to, I don't know if we have consensus on that or not. A couple, so is there a discussion on that? Anybody feel strongly one way or the other?
I'm good with that. I'm good with removing it.
Remove?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with
Okay. So those two changes, RMU, I'm sure you guys will follow my lead on that one.
I wanted to call it just moo.
RMU.
M-O-O, moo. Everybody would know what it meant.
Well, I think you need to indicate it's residential and get it at a mixed use.
Well, if it was.
But I don't know, what's wrong with RM?
RMU.
Like, there's so many acronyms in here. If we did something a little silly, it would also be easier to remember. So that's my recommendation, M-O-O, moo.
All right. So I'm ready to entertain a motion, or if there's more discussion, hoping for a motion.
And Chair LaFevers, I have a draft motion working here on the
Would you like me
screen that will also include those record corrections. So not to step on the toes of whoever's going to make the motion, but we have that the MU zone would change the name here and add the corrections, and that the objective design standards would only change with regard to those corrections, and that the rezone sites would include Site 5 for Lagunitas and remove Site 16, and that there's no changes to the CEQA. So that is what is on the screen, and if the maker of the motion has anything else to add.
Simply a question, is your language sufficient to have Lagunitas as a somewhat of an addendum, or I can't recall how you phrased it, but so that we're safe as we present it to HCD? Is that language
Yes.
okay? You're okay with that?
Yes, it will be,
Okay.
this will all be included and updated when it goes to city council, so that the ordinance will actually include the Lagunitas site
Mhm.
and its potential units.
I thought there was some concern that it not be simply added to the list with no indication of its status. No? It's okay to just have it as...
We're going to try to add it and hope that they don't submit another
Okay.
pending project.
Okay, well, I'm prepared to make a motion with the chair's consent that she has given. Obviously, I don't have to read it all, but I move to recommend that the City Council adopt proposed Ordinance A, adding Chapter 14.19 to this CMC to include a new mixed-use zone, including the following changes. Change the name of the zone to RMU, residential/mixed-use, and add the language as indicated in the staff presentation with the amendments presented here tonight.
Second.
And specify that also that we're adopting proposed ordinance B, adding chapter 14.51 of the CMC to include the new objective design standards and include the changes as indicated in staff's presentation this evening. And to adopt proposed ordinance C, amending the official zoning maps and LCP to rezone the select parcel to mixed use and include the following changes. Include Site 5, the Lagunitas site, and remove Site 16. And finally, find that the addendum to the certified program EIR satisfies the environmental review requirements of CEQA. Do it for us?
Yes.
Council?
Okay, now we're ready for a second.
Second.
Okay, John beat you to it, I think, so. All right. Okay,
We're all punchy.
so we have a motion on the floor with a second. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Moyer,
Yay.
Commissioner Slant,
Yes.
Commissioner Benefield,
Yes.
Vice Chair Allen,
Yes.
and Chair LaFevers.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Again, thanks so much for your work. Thank you for your presentation. Much appreciated. And that concludes that item of our agenda. So we'll pause just for a moment here as we move forward.
Do we have anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple housekeeping items at least.
What could possibly be on? What else?
Okay,
Off-leash
let's
park?
go to other business. Any other business?
Chair LaFevers, nothing for you under other business.
Okay, how about commissioners? Matters presented by commissioners tonight?
Yeah, I have a question.
Jane?
Okay. It seems to me that there's a lot of money in grants out there. And I wonder, does the city have a grant person, or do, I know the answer, but each department does their grants? I don't think you're taking a great advantage of what's out there, especially under NOAA for wetlands and ocean and all those kinds of things. You don't even have to match the funds in some cases. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a grant writer here that would just hit up all the departments for the information and write them? I know that they cost a little bit, but it seems like they would you know,
Cost benefit.
yeah, thank you, my mouthpiece.
Commissioner Benefield, you're stealing an idea right off of our city manager's playbook. It's something that we have been discussing or thinking about, and some of it comes down to that kind of cost benefit analysis of it would cost some money to bring on a consultant to help us apply for and pursue grants, but it does have the potential to more than pay for itself in grants awarded. The flip side of that, though, is also then staff capacity to carry out those grant-funded projects. We do, right, on individual departments do pursue and acquire or obtain grants from time to time. For example, right, a lot of the work that our long-range planning team is doing on the general plan update has been grant funded by a series of grants that we received from the California Coastal Commission. And so, that work effort to date has been almost entirely funded by grant monies that we received a number of years ago. And we've successfully managed to continue to apply for additional funds come each cycle to help carry this work effort on. That's just one example. So we do pursue it, but there is a capacity limitation to it. It's intensive to apply for these. It's intensive to manage them, and these grants come with then performance deadlines and right when you have small teams, as all of our departments typically do, and a big workload, it's hard sometimes to take on these additional commitments that then come with their own deadlines and obligations.
But
it is a good point, right? That if
the marsh, for instance, there are grants for wetlands, which is what it is, and I could write it. I mean, of course, anybody could write it, right or wrong, but it has to be submitted by an agency. So who in the agency, would you go to the council? It's not happening.
Yeah, so it would, so ultimately, right, individual departments are responsible currently to kind of look for and pursue these opportunities and bring them to the council and get the council's support to apply. And that does happen periodically, but I acknowledge your point that I'm sure there are a number of grants that would be a good fit for the city that get past us without us applying, just because we frankly just don't have the capacity to do so.
I just think you should pursue it.
Point taken.
Thank you. I don't want to keep you anymore.
David?
Just kind of a question on that subject, and as you have looked at it at all, is it likely that one can find someone who would have the background to know the range of different kinds of grants that may be available? For example, those that Parks would be looking at, they've often got a number of grants, be the same as what planning might be looking for. Is one person going to have or be able to quickly develop the knowledge and ability to look at all those things, or does that kind of come with a few years in an area of expertise? I really don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't either. I mean, I know there certainly are consultants out there that specialize in helping jurisdictions apply for these grants, but I don't know whether they're also the one out there searching for the grants, or if that still falls to city staff to say, hey, this grant looks like it could be a good fit for us. Help us put together a proposal.
It can be both.
Any other items by commissioners? Nope. Okay. Director's report.
Thank you, Chair. So in your director's report, you have the minutes from the September 26th Architecture Review Board meeting, city calendar for the month of November, and the planning activity reports and building permit reports for the month of October. Probably the only two, big items to note here are the remodel of the Palms has gotten through architecture review, I think maybe at that September 26th meeting, and it's tentatively scheduled to come before your commission next month for the December hearing. So this is the Palms rehab, if you will, rehabilitation project. And then also Surfliner Hotel application has been deemed complete back in September September, I think. And we are targeting that project going to the Architecture Review Board for preliminary review on December 12th. And so story polls for that project will be going up later this month, and we'll be getting the word out there to the public because it will have some impacts on the usability of the city parking lot for the period while the story polls are up. So December 12th for Surfliner ARB preliminary review, and December 2nd with your commission for the Palms rehabilitation. And that concludes my director's report.
Last item is attendance for the December meeting. I'm planning to be here.
I'll be here if I'm alive.
Sorry.
Swell.
I'm planning to be here. I didn't have my mic on, so. Attendance at meetings for December.
I'll be
David,
here.
yes.
I'm planning to be here.
Jane, yes. John, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Full house. Okay.
Vote tomorrow.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much.